Welcome to the Wizard of Radical Self-Respect. My name is Jared Mello, and I'm the Shepherd of Black Sheep. In today's video, I'm going to go down and break down some new details that came out about the Rob Reiner, Nick Reiner case. There's a few videos to go over about that. And I made a poll earlier what people wanted me to talk about tonight, whether it's U.S. attacking Venezuela or the new details in the Nick Reiner case. It was actually a 50-50 tie. I thought Nick Reiner was going to win. It looked like it was, but then it didn't. It turned into a tie. So tomorrow I will talk about U.S. attacking Israel. Venezuela. Oh, there, Jimmy. What's shaking? We're going over some new details about the Nick Reiner case today. And some of them are not really the best. I'll say that. Disappointing. Ram's Horn, welcome. Glad to have you here on this Saturday evening. How was your day? Anything cool going on? And to reiterate, tomorrow night, I will go over U.S. attacking Venezuela. Tonight is Nick Reiner. But I wanted to leave it up to the people to see which one would win. And I was surprised that it was a tie. So we'll see. But let's jump right in here. This is crime talk. This is some interesting stuff here. Yes, welcome to all the black sheep. Montana, welcome. Glad to have you here.
Good day, Crime Talk aficionados. We have another great show for you today. First, the court puts a hold on the autopsy records in the Reiner case. And there's also a report that Nick Reiner was seeking a firearm prior to the murders. A California farmer was arrested on suspicion of murder of his wife in Arizona. The family of slain 9-year-old Melanie Buzzard expresses outrage over her not guilty plea. It's just what you got to do. Anyway, the singer, David, spelled with a 4, he reportedly is facing a potential murder indictment, for the death of Celeste Rivas Hernandez. The former sheriff, Sean Mickey Steins, he doesn't like his judge and he wants a new one. Former home improvement Reiner, that's right. The Los Angeles County Department of Medical Examiner has implemented a security hold on all the records pertaining to the death of filmmaker Rob Reiner and his wife, Michelle Singer Reiner, following a court order requested by the LAPD. Now, the directive, effective from December 24th, prohibits the dissemination of autopsy reports and any related material, including information previously made public. So how ridiculous.
What's up with this? So the LAPD said now autopsy reports and other information previously made public is no longer allowed? What the heck is that all about? That sounds ridiculous.
Ridiculous is that you can't talk about the things or disseminate anything that's already been made public? Unbelievable. Why? I don't get this. The government works for us. A murder took place in the community and we can't find out what the circumstances are about it. That makes no sense to me. But these judges somehow think that we're just all a bunch of, frail little things that we're just going to crumble at the sign of disturbing information. And it makes no sense to me.
So chat, what do you think about this? How does this happen? Is it just Alan Jackson's influence? Is it because it was Rob Reiner? Like, where does this come from? I mean, I'll be curious what you all think, but to me, it seems unprecedented, especially for such a public case.
Anyway, in a statement issued today, the medical examiner's office confirmed receipt of the order and notice that even prior disclosures, such as the cause of death listed as multiple sharp force injuries and the manner classified as homicide, have been withdrawn from public view. Ooh. Unbelievable. Anyway, the department reiterated its dedication to public transparency where permissible, indicating that the records will become available upon the lifting of the hold.
So again, is that not talking out of both sides of their mouth? Oh, on one hand, there's a hold on all this information. And then on the other hand, we're committed to transparency. Talk about double speak there. My Lord.
Now, for those who aren't familiar with this case, obviously Rob Reiner, 78, director for films such as The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men, and Michelle Singer Reiner, who's 70, a photographer and producer, were discovered dead in their Brentwood residence on December 14th of 2025. Their daughter alerted police after finding the bodies in the afternoon. That same evening, their son, Nick Reiner, who's 32, was apprehended at the Exposition Park district in Los Angeles. He currently faces 2 counts of first-degree murder with the special circumstances alleging multiple victims and the use of a deadly weapon, to wit, a knife. He remains in custody without bail as the case proceeds. Now, background reports highlight Nick Reiner's longstanding challenges with substance abuse and mental health issues, which the family had sought to address through repeated interventions. This guy's been to rehab 18 times, ladies and gentlemen. There's something more than just doing drugs. The kid's not wired right, okay? He's clearly self-medicating because he's not wired right. Anyway, prior police visits to the residence for welfare checks and domestic concerns have also been documented over the years. Now, this is where, unconfirmed. So take it for what it is. Unconfirmed reports from anonymous sources initially circulated by an entertainment columnist today, echoed in subsequent media coverage, alleged that Nick Reiner expressed interest in acquiring a firearm in the period leading up to the incident. Now,
How about that? So he was inquiring about purchasing a firearm leading up to the incident. That sparks a whole nother discussion there too. But what do you think about that?
Claims remain unsubstantiated by police, but not like the police are going to tell us. They won't even tell us that, the Reiners passed.
Okay, so those claims are unsubstantiated, so keep that in mind too. But let's say if it was true, what do you think?
Away as the cause of death of murder and sharp injury did it, right? They're not going to tell us that, so I'm not sure they're going to confirm this either. So anyway, the coroner and the police aren't even going to say that they died of stab wounds. So we'll leave it at that, which takes us back to the LAPD's described the security hold as a standard measure to safeguard ongoing investigations taking place regarding the case. Now, the district attorney, Nathan Holcomb, has characterized the proceedings as profoundly difficult given the familial context while committing to a thorough pursuit of justice. The case continues to develop amid, obviously, the heightened public and media attention. Like I said, there are these reports that Nick Reiner expressed interest in acquiring a firearm in the weeks leading up to the death of his parents on December 14th. Insiders speaking to gossip columnist Rob Schuter, Schuter, described a rapid deterioration in the situation leading up to the incident, i.e. the death of his parents. One source noted that events escalated rapidly, characterizing Nick Reiner's demeanor as unusually composed and determined, which heightened concerns. Another emphasized that the focus should be on his mindset during that period rather than on any specific possessions.
And Ann said in the chat, there's potential that they did hide this so that new jurors are not tainted with the information. That's a possibility.
Remains unclear if Nick pursued efforts to obtain a firearm. Obviously, one would think he probably didn't, since he used sharp objects instead, allegedly. Now, the allegations emerge amid the backdrop of this long-standing family challenges, including Reiner's history with drug abuse that we talked about. There are also records coming out that show that the Los Angeles Police Department responded to the Reiner's residence on multiple occasions over the years, including calls related to family disputes and welfare checks. Now, obviously, the prosecution has indicated the charges could carry severe penalties, including life with the possibility of no parole, as well as the death penalty. We'll see where this shakes up. Obviously, everybody's looking for as much news as they can on the Reiner case. Not much is going to happen until Reiner's back in court after the first of the year. I believe it's January 7th, and hopefully we'll see where things will go. Clearly, the defense is investigating all of this. He's probably been shrunk by many a psychiatrist or psychologist over the last several weeks so they can figure out where the heck they're going with the insanity defense, or just maybe a good old-fashioned general denial. Going to be tough to claim self-defense because allegedly the Reiners were sleeping when Nick Reiner allegedly cut them with very sharp objects, resulting in their death. Next, a California farmer arrested on suspicion of murder of his wife in Arizona. So in the sun-baked Imperial Valley of Southern California.
All right. That was all he had, I guess, about the old Nick Burt Reiner. So what did we learn? He might have tried to buy a gun a couple weeks ago. That's unsubstantiated. And there's a hold on the autopsy report. And there's a hold on any other new information and information that was public before. Very interesting. Now, how to look at that? Well, it could be because they don't want jurors to be biased. Sure, that's possible. And granted, I don't know how any jurors are chosen, especially in such a public case. I mean, how do they prove that they've heard nothing about it? Anyone who's on social media has probably heard something about it. So how do they pick in that case? Ugh. Where is this thing? Prof. Joe explains. Exposed Rob and Michelle Reiner. Where is it? There it is.
Ciao a tutti. This is Prof. Joe at Prof. Joe Explains. And tonight we are really privileged to have a very special guest, Nima Rahmani, which you may have seen on other podcasts or on CNN or Fox or Court TV or BBC or anywhere you turn on your TV.
So apparently this is a new channel, and we're going to help a new channel, Prof. Joe Explains, get some spotlight here. I don't know very much about her, so we're all going to learn about her together.
Or look at your phone to listen to something with regard to legal issues. He is, I should bring him in right now, and then I'll give you the rest of his biography. Okay. He is a UCLA grad, Harvard JD at 21. I thought I graduated early, but you have me beat. He's the president and co-founder of the West Coast Travel Lawyers. And you do, and you correct me if I'm wrong, personal injury and employment law primarily. Is that right?
That's right, Joe. Primarily plaintiff's work.
Plaintiff's work. Yeah, I saw that. You just, here's something near and dear to my heart. They just opened up a practice on lemon law. And if there's one thing that I think consumers would embrace, it's lemon law practice. He's got experience as a prosecutor, prosecuted human trafficking cases and complex drug cases, and he's co-host of a LA legal podcast. So, and he, as I said, and he's all over as a legal expert and a legal analyst for good reason. He is very well informed.
So here's the thing, though. We are going by what Alan Jackson himself said. Like he's putting that stuff out there. So why did he put it out there? And again, I'm not saying I believe it. I'm not saying I believe he has schizophrenia, because I'm waiting for that to be confirmed by a doctor during the trial. So on one hand, things are HIPAA protected, but on the other, then why is he saying it? Why is he saying it before the trial?
Very knowledgeable, very smart, and very articulate. So,
thank you, Joe.
You're welcome.
That introduction. So glad to be on with you. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it very, very much. So tonight it's Nick Reiner, and you're Reiner, and you're right in the middle of it. You're in LA, are you not?
I'm in LA. I live and work in Los Angeles. My home is a couple miles away from the Reiner home, the scene of the crime. So I'm intimately familiar with the area and this case.
Yeah. So is there any word on the street that you can give us that hasn't been widely circulated yet about what they think occurred or the chronology of what occurred?
I mean, we've heard a lot, and I'm happy to get into some of the chronology that's been reported. I don't have a whole lot of inside information that's confirmed. Obviously, I talked to a lot of reporters here, and there has been some speculation that Rob and Michelle Reiner's throats were slashed. I haven't been able to confirm that. Obviously, that would change the trajectory of the case in terms of premeditation. Obviously, very difficult to argue self-defense or anything less than second-degree murder under those circumstances.
Right.
But I think what has been reported, and I think what most folks have confirmed, at least the local reporters here, whether it's the argument at Conan O'Brien's Christmas party the night before, the fact that Rob and Michelle were killed in their master bedroom, and then Nick fled to a hotel in Santa Monica. I think that's all pretty strong evidence so far, as well as the multiple stab wounds that were reported on the medical examiner documents.
Yeah. And I thought, given that he's one, but so far as we know, one person and two victims, I had thought early on that in my head, the most logical progression was that he had slashed a throat and pretty much immobilized one of them in the bed. I mean, it may turn out to be something different, but that seemed to me to be the most reasonable explanation I could come up with for him being able to kill two people when he's one. So.
No question. Obviously, Nick is reportedly 32, I believe. His father, Rob, was 78. His mother, 70. And it's interesting, when they were found in the master bedroom by Nick's sister, she originally found just her father, I believe. So it's going to be interesting to see the placement of the bodies. I still think that's a very bad fact for Alan Jackson and the defense. Obviously, you go into someone's master bedroom, even when you're living in the guest house. That doesn't strike me as second-degree murder. Certainly not manslaughter or self-defense, whether perfect or imperfect self-defense. So
particularly when it's a knife, and I don't know about other people's bedrooms, but I don't keep any knives in mine. So it does suggest that he came in with the knife and didn't find it there. But you're right. We don't know. We can only, I heard one, and I don't know, again, it's all speculation, because somebody speculated that maybe he took out the hotel room first and then went to the mansion, which would make the facts even worse for the defense.
That would be much worse.
Yeah.
My limited understanding is there's the Christmas party, there's the argument there, lots of percipient witnesses that are going to testify to that. I mean, there's so many things that are fascinating about this case in terms of the high-profile nature of the victim, but also many of the witnesses. I mean, I expect this case to likely go to trial, given Alan Jackson's sort of very aggressive reputation. I can't see him pleading this case out, though. Of course, you certainly never know, because I don't think the district attorney here is going to offer any type of deal. They mentioned that's possibility of the death penalty here. We haven't had an execution in California in 20 years. And I used to work with District Attorney Nathan Hochman. He's great, very fair. But I think probably that statement that this may be a death penalty case.
Nothing new here so far. Thank you very much for this, Zelda. I appreciate the super sticker. You're the best.
Probably isn't very realistic given the political climate here in California. Obviously, Governor Gavin Newsom, he has termed out, he's issued a moratorium on the death penalty. It would really take something extraordinary, Republican appointed to statewide office here in California, to lift that moratorium. I don't expect that to happen. So this is likely a first-degree special circumstances case, which would be a mandatory life without the possibility of parole here.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. Do you have any idea how Alan Jackson was brought into the case? I've seen, again, speculation about whether it was the family members, or maybe in the will there was a trust set up with.
And I've been hearing multiple things about this part. Like, what I had read was he was put on retainer. And when I heard what the siblings were saying about blaming the doctors, not Nick, I was like, well, now it makes sense. Now it makes sense that the siblings might be okaying this. But then someone else said Alan Jackson did something so that he'd be able to use the estate money. but I didn't see any confirmation of that. So let's see what they say.
Some sort of trustee who was reaching out, or maybe that Alan Jackson's people reached out to him. Has there been any sort of landing on one theory as compared to another?
So if we're assuming that Alan Jackson is getting paid, right, and is not doing this, for the publicity, again, I think it's likely going to be the highest profile case, certainly in recent memory hearing in California, probably the biggest since OJ. If he's getting paid, you're right, it would have to be another family member, some sort of independent trust that had nothing to do with the estate. In this case, California, like most states, does have a slayer statute. So if you kill your parents, you are deemed to have predeceased them. You're written out of any will, trust, life insurance, anything where you could be a beneficiary. So certainly.
And we went over this the other day. We went over the slayer statute is what it's called.
I think it would be surprising if Nick Reiner had significant financial assets when he had a pretty well-documented drug problem and he's living in his parents' guest house. Can't imagine he has access to probably the seven figures or more that would be required to retain Jackson's services. What's interesting about Jackson, obviously, everyone knows him from the Karen Reed case, but he's also handling a pretty high-profile case here in California where an individual was driving reportedly in excess of 100 miles an hour on Pacific Coast Highway and killed 4 Pepperdine University college students. And that individual is being charged with malice murder as well. So that case has sort of been trailing the Karen Reed one. So I think Jackson's going to have to deal with that Pacific Coast Highway case first before he pivots to Reiner. I would be surprised if we go to trial anytime before 2027.
Yeah. Do you, with regard to the statutory prohibition on somebody benefiting from the murder, does that trigger before there's been a conviction?
So if there's a conviction, it's presumed that the statute applies, but a probate judge can apply it even on a lower civil standard, right? You don't necessarily need a conviction.
Right. And this is what we went over the other day too, because it would be weird if there needed to be a conviction. That would prevent the whole thing from going down, right? If you needed the conviction first, how would they really stop you? So it can be a civil thing, as he's saying.
So a judge can rule by preponderance of the evidence that Nick Reiner should be forfeited any inheritance rights under the will. Now, of course, even if that happens, the surviving siblings could certainly choose to pay for his defense, right? That's right. Something that they can do. But I would really be surprised if it's Nick Reiner's money. Again, unless there's some separate trust that was set up. But even if it was something that was set up for the purpose of his life that really has nothing to do with Rob and Michelle Reiner's estate, I would be surprised if it were significant in terms of the financial support that Nick would receive. Again, here's someone that has a drug problem. If your parents, the last thing you probably want is to give someone like that access to unlimited money. You probably want to maintain some sort of control.
What do you know about California's, let's say, substantial barriers to get someone involuntarily committed?
I know we've seen it. We dealt with it a lot with Britney Spears and conservatorship, right?
And this is one of the big things I would like to see changed overall in every state, really, where if someone's a danger to themselves or others, and Rob Reiner reportedly said, "I'm petrified of my son, I think he can hurt me," there has to be a way to get those kinds of people off the street for more than 72 hours. Now, how you do it and where you send them, I'm not exactly sure. But I think there needs to be a mechanism in place so that you protect the public from people in Nick Reiner's shoes. That's what it's about to me.
It can certainly happen. Obviously, it's not going to happen now because Reiner's in custody. I don't know if it's something that Rob and Michelle Reiner ever intended to pursue. Again, that's something that will typically also go into probate court, and you need to argue that this person is incapable of taking care of themselves and to have them committed. The challenge, I think, with this case is, notwithstanding the pretty well-documented drug issues, and I think we can assume, even though I'm not an expert, obviously, that Nick Reiner does have some serious mental health issues as well. There are reports of schizophrenia. I don't know if that's accurate or not, or something that was placed by the defense, who really has done a good job on the public relations side of things as well. The standard for commitment involuntarily is, here's someone that is unable to take care of himself, right? And if you're, capable enough to go to a Christmas party with your parents and have an argument with them, and then go to the gas station and buy a drink and check into a hotel, that's someone that's capable of taking care of themselves. And
I don't like this. If that's what it's considered to take care of yourself, then that shouldn't be the standard. And maybe that's part of the problem, right? That is the standard, where in California, that's how you get off the streets for 72 hours. But that doesn't make any sense to me, because the people you need to be protecting people from are people that are capable of dangerous things. People that can go to a party, people that can go to a convenience store, people that can clean up after they allegedly off their parents. Those are the people you need protecting from, not the people that can't even take care of themselves anymore. So you need to have that violence element in play, if you ask me. The same thing with that guy on the train in North Carolina.
I know we're going to talk about insanity, and California follows the Monotone test. Very similar, right? Someone, because of a mental disease or defect, they don't know the nature and consequences of their actions. They don't know right from wrong, right? I don't think that, again, in my lay person's opinion, but who's seen enough of these cases, I don't think Nick Reiner qualifies for, a conservatorship or not guilty by reason of insanity, because again, it's such a high legal hurdle.
I looked at the insanity defense, and it's dangerous for lawyers to look at something in another jurisdiction with a half hour and figure something. So I want that caveat out there. But it looked as though the insanity defense in California is an affirmative defense. In other words, the defendant has to prove it by a preponderance, which makes the defense, I think, even harder to do.
Joe, that's absolutely right. So I can talk to you about the insanity defense here in California. Why?
Prove it by preponderance. This is a good thing to go over here. Let's see what he says.
It's so difficult to prove. First of all, jurors in general, they're very skeptical of this type of defense. And it really only works a small percentage of the time. But procedurally, the trial is bifurcated. So you have the guilt phase first. Then the burden shifts to the defense to prove that, notwithstanding the defendant being guilty of the crime, that because of that mental disease or defect, they're unable to understand the nature and consequences of their action. They're unable to know right from wrong. And it's a burden shifting statute. The burden is on the defense. It's still a preponderance standard, so slightly more likely than not. But procedurally, the bifurcation is important, because imagine you're a jury, right? And you have the defense put on an affirmative defense in the guilt phase, right? They're saying this was self-defense, this was manslaughter, it wasn't him, whatever it is. And then they have to try to pivot, right? And say, oh yeah, it actually was him, but he was legally insane. You really do lose a lot of credibility with the jurors. I think the more effective way to do it, and again, this is very risky. I don't know if Alan Jackson would do this, essentially plead guilty, and then you focus all your attention on the insanity defense. We've seen this sometime in death penalty cases. I think probably Nicholas Cruz is maybe the best recent example, where the defense, and this is obviously the Parkland school shooter, worst school shooting in American history, they pleaded him out to 17 counts of murder, 17 counts of attempted murder, and they went straight to the penalty phase, and they were able to save his life. I think it's very hard.
So Bear said good parents don't give up on their kids. And I would say there are some cases where you do have to distance yourself sometimes. There are cases where you have to protect yourself and your family, especially if there's drugs and mental illness involved. Or in comparison to what I normally talk about, there are such a thing as adult children narcissists. And if they're going to abuse you and disrespect you and mistreat you, I don't have a problem with parents doing what was best for them in that case. And if that means cutting them off, it means cutting them off. But again, it all depends on each individual situation. And especially if violence can come into play, now you actually, I think, have more of a responsibility to do something about it and protect the rest of your family.
To argue that he's both not guilty and also insane. I know defense lawyers never like to give up that guilty verdict, especially in a potential life case. But I do think it is hard to argue both because of the bifurcation.
Do you think it's really risky here? I mean, we don't know what other evidence there might be out there, but if the evidence that's out there is what we know, and there's nothing more that comes forward, it doesn't appear that there's a case that someone else committed who did the killings. So how risky then is it to admit what the facts conclusively demonstrate?
I agree. And when you're looking at these murder cases, typically you'll see 3 defense.
And so Jimmy says in the chat too that that's actually what Rob and Michelle were afraid of, that something bad would happen. And I would say you can't let your kid hold you hostage like that. You have to do what's best for you. But if you are too concerned about what they'll do in retaliation, then you're still giving all of the power and control to that person. So if it comes down to a narcissist, for example, the only exception would be like, okay, if you really think they can absolutely harm your life and it's like very sure they will. But I just think you can't let them hold you hostage like that. And especially if they're going to be violent in the way that Nick was, I think there's nothing wrong with protecting yourself in that case. And again, maybe getting a restraining order, anything is better than what happened, right?
Says the first is, it wasn't me. And that's unlikely. I mean, I expect that there's a lot of evidence, blood, DNA, video surveillance that's going to come out that Nick Reiner was the killer. So that's one defense that's likely to be unsuccessful, right? But again, and Karen Reed, I think Jackson really did a good job of, putting law enforcement on trial and really bringing up an alternate theory of the case in that particular case. But assuming it's Reiner, right? Then you start looking at the other possible defenses, Joe. And one is self-defense. And I think that self-defense is very difficult when there's a significant age difference. And like we talked about, right? This happened in the master bedroom. Unless the defense can somehow credibly argue that mom and dad or mom or dad had a weapon, I just don't see that defense working. So assuming now, there is a possibility in California, and this is one of those things where the jurisdiction matters. California does have an imperfect defense statute where if you genuinely but unreasonably believe you're an imminent risk of death or serious bodily injury, it does reduce murder to manslaughter. But again, I just can't see how Nick Reiner could genuinely believe that. Maybe that's when you lead it.
I don't see there being any self-defense here. I mean, where would the self-defense be? From what we know, Rob was in the bed. And I think we know that Michelle was found in the hallway. I mean, where's the self-defense?
Into the drug use. I'm sure we're going to talk about the drug use a lot or the mental health issues. That's one possible way they could try to argue the imperfect self-defense. It's interesting. That's what the defense in the Menendez brothers case tried to argue as well, that they genuinely believe Jose Menendez would kill Eric and Lyle Menendez if they outed him for sex abuse. I think the courts and the juries that considered that defense rejected it because again, it's challenging, right? Again, it's in LA. 2 parents were killed, so I just want to kind of compare. But when you shoot and kill your parents while they're sitting on the couch watching TV and you reload, they're unarmed, you have a shotgun, it's hard to argue self-defense.
Well, when you go back out to the car to reload and then go in and finish off the mother, about whom you didn't have any direct evidence that she was abusing them in the trial. Yeah, it makes it really tough.
It's very hard.
My own view is the knife makes it just extremely difficult because I can't imagine that the knife was in the bedroom when he arrived. And so if he comes in with it, then to argue any level of genuinely believe, you were in fear of imminent harm when you could just have left the house. You didn't have to enter the bedroom with
with a knife, it's very difficult. They weren't armed, so how would you ever even think about doing a self-defense? I don't think it's going to happen. Now, an interesting case is the Menendez brothers, considering the abuse they alleged and the essay they alleged. If in fact it's true, it does bring up an interesting point, but then the question becomes, okay, even if that did happen, what are you allowed to do in recourse? Are you allowed to do that and get away with it because you were a victim? So far, the law in California says no. You are not allowed to do that regardless of what happened. And again, some people don't believe them that that's what happened either. So, but I would caution that to the victims, like, okay, just because you've been a victim of abuse doesn't mean you'll be able to do a disproportionate retaliation without getting in trouble yourself.
A knife, it's hard for me to believe a jury would go there.
It's very hard. And whenever you get an argument and you come back with a weapon under California law, that's premeditation. That's first-degree murder. That's not manslaughter under any circumstances. There's another very high-profile case. Again, these are all LA cases, so I just want folks who maybe are true crime fans and have been following these other trials to know how the defenses were presented. This was a Nipsey Hussle case. He was a very prominent rapper here in Los Angeles. He got in an argument with someone. That individual went back, got a gun, came back, and...
Side note, my favorite Nipsey Hussle quote is, if you look at your friends and you don't get inspired, you don't have a circle, you have a cage.
The court and the jurors ruled that's first-degree murder. That's enough time for premeditation. And I think that's the challenge the defense is going to have when you're talking about manslaughter, when you're talking about heat of passion. There really isn't when you go into someone's bedroom with a weapon. They are unarmed. It's really challenging.
Yeah.
I think the only real possibility, and this would be very conservative, we know all in any jurisdiction, right? Voluntary drug use is not a defense. So though it can be used to negate the specific intent for a specific intent crime. So it's possible that the defense may argue, this was malice murder, but because of drug use, because of mental health issues, Nick Reiner was unable to form the mens rea, the specific intent for the premeditation. That would knock first degree down to second degree, which would give Reiner the possibility of parole at some point in his life. But again, that would require the defense to really admit to everything but that premeditation.
Yeah, again, now I only looked at California law.
Now, this is my opinion, but there does seem to be a fair amount of premeditation here to me. I think they're going to have a really difficult time knocking it down to anything, even besides the insanity part. I don't see how they'd be able to do it.
Briefly, and you're there, but I thought I found that I think it might have been 2025 that California eliminated the diminished capacity defense and says that it's not admissible. Intoxication, trauma, mental illness is not admissible to negate the mens rea, but can be used in sentencing to decrease the sentence that's imposed.
So there is no official diminished capacity defense in California, but it can be used to negate the specific intent for a specific intent crime. You can always argue as a defense attorney in California that your client lacked the specific.
Right. Okay.
Now, if they really wanted to get creative, Joe, again, this would be very creative. I was thinking like outside the box, right? And again, going back to Karen Reed, they did such an effective job alleging this cover up, right? That law enforcement.
So a commenter in the chat said that Alan Jackson wants to kind of put this case on ice, enhance some of the holds, and then get people to forget about it, and then create a new story later. Very possible that's exactly what he's doing.
To kill John O'Keefe, Karen Reed's boyfriend. I was thinking, how might Alan Jackson defend this case? One very creative way to do so would be to argue involuntary intoxication, right? You have Reiner, he goes to this Christmas party and someone drugs him, right? They put something in his drink, some, psychedelic like PCP or something like that. Now, again, obviously we know that involuntary intoxication can be a defense. Obviously you can't form criminal intent if you
about a case that has enough publicity now. If the claim is going to be one of these high-profile actors or actresses or directors at a party drugged him, and then he went off.
Sorry, Joe. I lost audio real quickly.
Said if that's the defense, that would take the publicity level in this case to a stratosphere unknown to humankind before. Because I'm imagining no one at that party wants to come in and testify in the first place. They'd rather be anywhere else than at a trial, having to talk about what they saw. And the idea that there would be this whiff of somebody at the party might have been in part responsible would really send them, running wherever to get out of the way of the trial. Not that that would help if they're called.
I agree. The case is going to get a lot of attention because, again, there's the murders. It's here in Los Angeles. It's going to be televised like most trials here are. You have the celebrity factor. I mean, that's very...
And I don't think Nick's going to be able to pull an inadvertent drug use card. I mean, would he get drugged at Conan's party? No. I mean, they might try to pull some medication withdrawal or getting the meds right thing. I don't know. I don't think they're going to be able to do that successfully either, though.
Be real. If folks like Conan O'Brien and Bill Hader, even other people that are friends with the Reiners may testify. Larry David, Billy Crystal. I mean, it's your who's who of Hollywood celebrities that are witnesses in this case. So, you may have that celebrity effect like we saw in the Johnny Depp Amber Heard case that got a lot of attention. I think this is probably the biggest case in Los Angeles since the OJ case because of the gruesome nature of the murders, the fact that it was their son, the celebrities. You got Alan Jackson, a celebrity lawyer. So I think there's going to be a lot of interest in this case and a lot of folks watching. I agree with you, Joe. A lot of famous witnesses on that list.
Yep. Who would be, as I say, I don't know that anybody is happy to come in and testify in a murder trial, but I'm sure celebrities and high-profile people are at the top of the list of those who would rather be somewhere else. But they may be coming, right? So I have, well, let me ask something else first. You talked about it a little, you alluded to it anyway, the impact that drug use might have on even a diagnosis that he was. I mean, that schizophrenia idea that's out there, which is coming, I think, from one particular place, and it looks like it might be maybe not that I know, but a deliberate leak of something. We don't know that it's true. But even assuming that there's been a diagnosis, the idea that the drugs may have had impact on that seems to me to make a case that's really difficult even harder if they're going to try to even maintain the insanity defense.
It's hard, and we've talked about it, that drug use. If you are voluntarily taking drugs, even if you know it's not the exact type of drug, that really negates any type of defense. I mean, you really bear the...
Correct. And I mean, this is the other thing, right? If Nick, let's for sake of argument say Nick was schizophrenic. I don't know if you saw my short that I made about this the other day, but I've also gotten the vibe he might be undiagnosed on the spectrum, definitely had an addiction issue. But ultimately, I think the biggest problem was he had a character issue, and he might have had something like vulnerable narcissism. This is not a diagnosis, it's just my opinion. But you look at his past behavior. He was entitled, spoiled, arrogant. He was bitter, resentful, envious of his father's and grandfather's success. He had grandiosity that wanted to come out. And an impaired empathy, for sure. All of that combined, and then you get what you get. But the point is, say he did have schizophrenia, right? Then it becomes your responsibility to do something about it. And then part of your responsibility is not doing things that make it 1,000 times worse, whether that's meth, heroin, coke, weed, or fill in the blank with whatever it is. Even sometimes Adderall. I don't think Adderall would be good for schizophrenia either. Now, the debate would come, can you drug yourself into schizophrenia? You can definitely drug yourself into schizophrenia-like symptoms, but can you actually get diagnosed with schizophrenia just from drugging yourself and it wasn't there originally? That's a debatable question. I don't really know the answer to that. I know you can certainly mimic it, absolutely. But is that enough to get an insanity plea? I don't think so. I think if there's any choice of drugs, just like if you get behind the wheel of a car drunk, you did it. Like there's no excusing that at that point.
The consequences of your actions. So, obviously we know Jackson's one of the best, not just in the courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. And I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's a whole PR battle being waged as well to try to get some sympathy, where folks can be talking about Nick Reiner's mental health to potentially.
But I think drug-induced psychosis is different than schizophrenia. Like, those are two different things. I don't even think drug-induced psychosis is enough to get off the hook either.
Sway those potential jurors out there. But again, it goes back to when we started the show, Joe. We're talking about someone who's capable and coherent enough to go to a holiday party, to talk to celebrities, to have an argument with his parents, to go back home, go into the master bedroom, and regardless of what happened, to go to a hotel in Santa Monica, clean up in the bathroom, close the shades, walk into a gas station, buy a drink. That does not strike me as someone who is legally insane. And then you add the drug use on top of it. It just seems like a very weak insanity case to me. Now, I'm sure the defense, like most great defense lawyers, will put on their experts and they're going to opine that Reiner didn't know and he was in some temporary psychosis, but I can't see jurors believing it. It's just my humble opinion with the state of the evidence.
And again, Alan Jackson might be looking at all this and he's thinking, well, what's our best chance? Is our best chance to say that he was had schizophrenia, and then he drugged himself into a worse state of schizophrenia / drug-induced psychosis? Would he say that's their best case? Or would he say their best case is something about the prescription medicines and withdrawal or not getting it right? Like, if you're Alan Jackson, which do you choose? Again, because this isn't about what should happen. This is now about, for Alan Jackson, what's going to get the best outcome for my client. So if you're Alan Jackson out there, what would you do? What would be your chess move? What would be your course of action?
So far.
Let me play you a couple of clips. I listened to, there's a podcast out there called Dopey Podcast, and it was two former drug users, one of whom then relapsed and died of an overdose. But the podcast is pretty graphic. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody listening to this, or at least I'd mention it with warnings about what you're likely to hear if you listen to it. But Nick did 4 interviews with them over a period of time, around the time that the movie came out that he had done that was loosely based on his life. And if I can indulge you, I'd like you to listen to one and then the other and get your take on what.
So what I learned from that Dopey podcast was that's where I really saw his impairment / lack of empathy. In particular, that story he was telling about the older woman that ended her own life. And Nick was telling the story with just not a care in the world about it at all. So that was pretty brutal and cold of him. Seemed like a lack of empathy. And then it sounded like in some of the cases he might have been using before the podcast too. That wouldn't surprise me at all either. But none of it makes Nick look good. And if anything, it makes you see that he's not insane. Like, he knows what's going on here. He's not that far off the rocker, at least in these podcasts, right? And it makes you think, well, anything he's going to try to say, just an attempt to avoid accountability. That's all it is.
How you think this impacts the ability to raise the insanity defense. So, Amber, can we play the first one? I'll give you some context here. He was in rehab, and he's talking about what he did because he wanted drugs and the rehab center wouldn't give him drugs. So let's listen.
Butchered, cop it on the street. The way I got butchered is actually really fun. I was at a Lena Lodge, and I don't know if I told this last week, but
so this story, what he's going to say is he wanted meds. He wanted to prove to them he was crazy. So he acts out very intentionally and throws a rock through a window. Those are the actions not of someone who's insane, but someone who very much knows exactly what they're doing, and they're manipulating consciously and deliberately. But you can hear it for yourself.
They refused to give me meds. So to prove I was crazy, because they were like, you don't need any meds.
Yeah,
and I
they're
was like
pretty strict
freaking
and
out. And I was like, you don't think I need meds? And they're like, yeah, we think you're just all up to an act here. And this is all just fake. And I said, okay. And then I went back to, the Roost. Remember the Roost?
No.
That's what they called the little barracks.
Okay.
And I was like, how do I show these motherfuckers that I'm crazy?
Yeah.
So I was like, I'll throw a rock through a window.
Yeah.
So I started and they have this thing there that they love. That little church. It's not a church, really.
Yeah.
It's like
they were building that when I was there.
It's like a meeting room that is like has these big glass windows, and they loved it. And they always were like, Mrs. Delaney was here when they built this, and I hated that whole thing. So I took a rock and I started on the path, and I was going up this hill, and my friend Peter was like, where are you going, man? And I was like, can't talk right now. I just got to do this. Yeah. And I went and I threw the rock through the window, and some woman saw me, and she ratted on me, and then they put me on Wellbutrin.
And so then they discharged you with your prescription. They dropped you off at Salvation Army with your Wellbutrin?
Yeah, I had Wellbutrin there.
Yeah.
That's how I had it.
Now, I don't know what that drug is, but it clearly was a drug that he was happy getting.
Wellbutrin is not even really considered a drug of abuse. Wellbutrin is an NDRI, a norepinephrine dopamine reuptake inhibitor. They give it to people for quitting smoking or sometimes to lose weight. But it's an antidepressant. That's what it is. It's not really a drug of abuse. Now, someone who desperately maybe just is trying to get outside of themselves, they might try to use it that way. But I don't think it would really work. Now, maybe if you're schizophrenic, I don't think Wellbutrin would be good for you if you're schizophrenic. Not without a mood stabilizer at the very least.
What would be if you were the defense on this? How would you approach that clip? And there are more of them, believe me, on this podcast.
Joe, I would hate it. That's an admission from your murder suspect, the defendant, that he was manipulating individuals to get drugs. And I believe, but I'm not certain, but Wellbutrin might be an antipsychotic. But I mean, here's someone that knows how to feign mental health issues, right? So he's
Wellbutrin is not an antipsychotic. Wellbutrin is an NDRI, like I said, norepinephrine dopamine reuptake inhibitor.
Really engaging in an act of violence to get drugs. That is bad. And that's not what you want. Someone that, again, is capable and coherent enough to manipulate a rehab facility and physicians to get prescription drugs. I mean, the problem with this case is, from a optics perspective, you have Rob Reiner, who's universally beloved here in Los Angeles and Hollywood. You have Nick Reiner, who many people think is the spoiled Nepo baby who's just addicted to drugs and ungrateful that his parents aren't giving him what he wants. And it's going to be very hard to break that. They were reportedly spending tens of thousands of dollars every month on services, rehab for their son. And what is he doing? Is he trying to get better? No, he's just trying to get drugs. And ultimately, they paid the ultimate price with their lives. And by all accounts, again, obviously I don't know, but by all accounts that everything's been reported, they were very loving and kind parents. And to suffer this fate, and when you have these types of statements and admissions by Nick Reiner, it's going to be very high legal and factual hill for the defense to climb in this case.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty damning also. The only thing that I could come up with that the defense might be able to use is it was 9 years ago. And therefore, it isn't necessarily evidence of what he recently might have done or not done. But you're clearly correct. It does show that he knows how to manipulate when he wants to.
The defense will try to in limit out, which they'll file a motion, right? And California is 352, the equivalent of federal rule, or in some states 403, right? They would argue the probative value is far outweighed by the prejudice, because again, it is a statement that would typically come in because it's an admission by a party opponent, right? So obviously the defense, and that's what the pretrial law and motion is all about, to keep these bad facts and evidence out. So we'll see if they're successful in a case like this.
And he sounds pretty coherent. I mean, it doesn't sound as though his mind is wandering or anything else is happening. He sounds, and I will tell you that those interviews, and as I say, I'm going to give a warning to everybody again, because not only is the language pretty, yet language that YouTube would not permit, but some of the descriptions, I mean, some of it is kind of extolling the enjoyment of taking drugs. There's also some explicit, some descriptions of sex that are pretty explicit on this. And the one thing I think the defense has going for it with regard to those clips is it's a conversation, and they get off on tangents. And so to be able to get what's being said and what he's responding to together with all these digressions makes it really tough. And I think they might have a shot at, maybe stopping some of it, because they'd have to get in so much other information that is really not very attractive to the defendant in order to get to some of them. But that one I was able to pull, and there was, except for one profanity in there was nothing, but most of it is, you have to pick it out of a lot of other information that's being talked about. So let me let you listen to another one, which you may have heard, because this one I have heard other places. And this is, once the movie came out, Rob and Nick.
And so to note also, as they're talking about in the chat, you don't give antidepressants to people that have bipolar or schizophrenia. The only time I've seen that happen is if it's in conjunction with an antipsychotic or mood stabilizer. But to give someone any of the antidepressants, if they're bipolar or schizophrenic, without an antipsychotic or without a mood stabilizer, that's a recipe for mania. So it's not suggested at all to do that.
Did a promo tour for the movie, and they're interviewed. And this is his description of an interview that he did, or maybe more than one.
Sound like, did you like the movie, or is it you didn't love the movie?
I feel like I didn't get to express how I truly felt in it.
Well, that was what I was. How much creative control did you have?
1/3, and 1/3 technically, and 1/8
in reality,
realistically.
Okay. Well, this is the first question. It's like, the story is supposed to be, and I'm not talking about the story of the movie. I'm saying in order to promote the movie, you kind of have to be sober. You kind of have to be a poster boy for recovery. And you didn't want to be that.
I said to them, listen, I'm not in the position to do this. I'm not a quote unquote sober guy. I'm going to have to go on to these talk shows. They said, you got to do it. They want the whole father-son angle. It just shows you how disgusting the
of course.
I mean, just the story out there. And so I just went out there and I just realized, look, I'm have a voice to some degree. I'm going to say what I got to say while I'm here.
At least you didn't sell out. You know what I mean? You stuck to your guns.
Yeah, I'm not going to, no. Yeah.
But you would say, you were like, I'm sober today. And you didn't you didn't want to get into the water, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure it put you in a really bad spot.
It did. It was hard.
Was it really uncomfortable?
Yeah. It was uncomfortable, but I felt like it was part of the job, part of what I had to do.
It was the job. Let me ask you a question. You don't have to answer.
No, I like where you're going.
Would you get high afterwards, after the appearance?
Yeah, I would. I'd smoke a joint on the roof of my apartment.
Let me ask you something else.
Please, he's answering the question.
And in a very hard to be this honest, but right? I mean, yeah, I would not ever go on to these things coked up or anything like that. I try to be straight, use the appearance as my motivation to be straight, do as best I could on it, and then afterwards enjoy a joint after.
Did you ever do dope after or anything like that?
That's why
you didn't shoot coke or dope this year.
No, I haven't done that in about 3 or 4 years.
There's no moderating with that. Shooting coke.
There's no moderating. That's a whole life right there.
Was your dad? Did your dad know you were getting stoned?
Yeah.
Would he get pissed?
No,
he didn't give a fuck. He's a hippie. Your dad,
the reason he's a hippie.
Yeah,
and they're very understanding.
Well, they're happy you're doing well.
But see, me saying this, I feel first of all horrible about copping to the fact that But
you feel horrible in front of us about it.
He feels horrible in front of the Dopey Nation.
Dopey Nation, I'm sorry. Also,
so what is he saying here? He's basically saying he was faking it in all these interviews. His heart wasn't really in it. He still wanted to use. He wasn't happy with the movie. He didn't think that enough of his insights got taken into consideration. He didn't like his dad. You can see in those interviews he was completely disconnected from his dad. So that's what you're hearing here in all of this, right? And to the people also that say that, oh, Nick must have had a terrible life or was abused, you have to understand also that some mental illness is absolutely innate, meaning you have a genetic predisposition to it and it's hereditary, and that can be there regardless of the environment. And that's what we talk about a lot, Dr. Salerno and I, in regards to narcissism, right? It doesn't have to be created via childhood trauma. It can be part of you have a genetic predisposition to this, and it can be hereditary. And regardless of how your parents are sometimes, you can still have a kid that's a narcissist. People don't like hearing that, but the data shows it's the case. Now, just like Dr. Keith Campbell said too, this is why they say parenting matters, but it doesn't make much of a difference. Why do they say that? Because they're pointing to the genetic component, the things that are innate or biological.
This is not the choir group, and you don't have to feel upset about it.
But I feel a little hypocritical myself.
Yes.
Okay.
I think I'm more open-minded than you are.
Because
about this
I've
stuff.
made this big thing that
So I'm like, the only requirement to be on dopey is the desire to stop.
But Nick,
Reaction?
Yeah, so I mean, here's someone, and I think most people who are watching will differentiate, marijuana use from cocaine and other what are considered more hardcore drugs. But again, here's someone who is very open about his voluntary drug use, right? The fact that, obviously he made a movie about it, about his experience, but and this is the challenge. If you do go in the direction of, involuntary intoxication, it's going to open the door to all these podcasts and episodes. What do you mean? You voluntarily took drugs for years. You expect these men and women on the jury to believe that you were drugged in this one instance? So again, very, very difficult case in terms of the facts that are presented so far, in terms of the rampant drug use that is, again, well documented, admitted to. I mean, these podcasts and the facts that we talk about make any viable legal defense very challenging.
Yeah. And I will add that one of the things he says throughout those interviews is he is not a believer in complete abstinence from drugs as the way to stay sober. He says over and over again that may be what other people need, but for me, I need to take, and he's talking about, he's not talking about H or other really high level drugs. So I think he may be talking about cocaine in here, but he's saying that he needs to do that. Otherwise, the enticement to do the other things would be too strong. And therefore, for him, he believes the right way to do it is to have some level of drug use.
I don't think that's the recommended Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous. I mean, they really.
Yeah, and that sounds like a reservation by Nick. He still wants to use, is keeping that door open. And to me, it prevented him from even really beginning the true recovery process. Because in order to truly even begin recovery, you have to be off of the drugs. You have to be off of the mind and mood altering substances. Then you can treat whatever mental health stuff is there. But if you don't do that, you're just not going to be able to get as far. And so AA and NA is something that I have found helpful. Now, other people there's also something called Smart Recovery. And granted, those two groups, they don't really like each other. Smart Recovery people, it's a different mode of doing it, right? So they're more into DBT stuff. It's more of a science-based stuff, in particular for people that kind of struggle with a higher power. So a lot of atheists would probably be more for the Smart Recovery. Me personally, I don't care what people use and what people do as long as it works for them. But those are some of the options out there, and they're free. That's one of the benefits of those things.
Really say if you're an alcoholic, you can't be drinking at all, right? If you are a drug addict, you can't be using any drugs. So certainly not the expert, but I think there's plenty of experts who would come and testify and say, that's not what you're taught, because you're an addict. You can't partake in it at all if you have a problem.
Yeah. It's hard for me to see, and maybe you're more creative about it, how he can weave his way through the comments that he's taking some lower level drug because that's right for him, and be able to explain away the number of times he relapses into something else, which suggests that his idea that that's the right way to go is at least contradicted by some episodes in his life.
They'll have to come up with something, right? And we know that insanity, I mean, we've talked about it, but in practice, how does it play out? If you're really legally insane, you think you're killing, an alien or a demon, right? I don't think that's going to apply. Or God or the dog is telling you to do something and you don't know that it's wrong. I don't think we can get there. Then you start saying, do we get to some sort of second degree murder? Do we get to some sort of manslaughter? Those would probably be pretty big wins for the defense, but they're really going to have to thread the needle here and walk a tightrope in a way that gets them out of first degree, because, again, judge is not going to have any discretion whatsoever. And, drug use, mental health, that's all mitigating factors that the judge can consider at sentencing and deciding whether to make him eligible for parole at some point in his life. But if it is a first degree conviction with those special circumstances, and by the way, the special circumstances here in California will be multiple murders, multiple victims, or a deadly weapon. I think both of those seem to apply in a case like this, plus the premeditation, of course. Then none of that's going to come into sentencing because the judge's hands will be tied, and it's going to be a life without the possibility of parole case.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little about, because I think some people in the chat may not know whether, to the extent there is a...
Let's go over California sober real quick. So California sober is when you do weed, but nothing else. Now, I don't think booze is included in that. And I think you're allowed to do your other psych meds. So that's where the gray area would be. Like, so if you're prescribed Adderall, I think they would still consider that California sober. If you are prescribed like maybe Xanax or Klonopin, benzodiazepines, would that be considered California sober? I'm not sure. Let me know, chat. I know it's weed. I just don't know what else exactly is included in it. And this is something I think Demi Lovato talked about. She said, oh yes, I'm California sober. And I think when she said it, I think she just meant weed. But there might have been some other psych meds in there too. I'm not sure.
Insanity plea, whether the jury will know the consequences to the defendant if he's found not guilty by reason of insanity, what happens next? Because I assume they'll be worried that he's going to be out on the street again, and
Yeah, they will not know. So if he is found not guilty by reason of insanity, he will be committed to a psychiatric facility. And at some point, if he is deemed competent and not a danger to the community, he can be released. So he's going to be committed for the term of his sentence. But if he is restored to sanity, he can be released at some point in his life. That's a determination that a judge has to make. And I do believe it's also a civil standard as well. But typically, obviously, if someone, is insane to the point that they stab and kill their parents, I would be very surprised if they ever see the light of day. Something would have to dramatically change for them to be released to the public.
So just, I'm sure this will come up, so let me ask. When you say the term of the sentence in the bifurcated system, if he's found guilty of murder 2, then the term of the sentence would be what he would have been imposed for murder 2, and then you go into the insanity, the not guilty phase.
Exactly. So murder 2 here in California, it's 15 to life. Obviously, there's potential enhancements as well. Murder 1, first degree murder is 25 to life. You add those special circumstances, you do get life without the possibility of parole. But the example in
so in my opinion, he should be at least 30 years to 40, I think, is what he should be getting in prison. That's my opinion, at the very least. The best case for him is probably he gets off on some sort of insanity thing, and then 30 years down the line, they consider him like rehabilitated or something. I don't think that's going to happen, but I think that would be his best case. And circling back to the addiction part too, like you really have to be careful when talking to someone who is an addict, that you're not talking to the version of them that just wants to continue using. And they'll have I just want to smoke, or I just want to drink. I can't be completely sober. Well, that's probably the version of them that is not that doesn't want what's best for them. So you have to understand that when you're talking to someone who's an addict, you have to figure out which version you're talking to. And it can be really tricky because the version that wants to continue using can be extremely sneaky, deceitful, and manipulative. And that's part of the problem I think Rob had, was they were listening to the version of Nick that didn't want what was best for him. But Rob was deceived, and they said, oh, we know now we shouldn't be listening to the licensed professionals. When in this case, I think the licensed professionals were right on the money. They said, no, your son's a liar and a manipulator. And in this case, they were absolutely right. There are other cases where I might not agree with the licensed professionals, but this is not one of them.
The Menendez brothers case, again, they were convicted of first-degree murder. There was the potential of the death penalty. The jurors decided not to sentence them to death. So when the brothers were finally resentenced, they were resentenced to 25 to life for both Jose and for Kitty Menendez, so 50 years total, and they were eligible for parole because of California's youth offender program. You can be parole eligible after serving half your sentence because they were youthful offenders.
Mm-hmm. And so at the bifurcated trial, assuming that that's what the defense does, the judge will impose the sentence he thinks is appropriate at the first stage, and that will be the sentence that carries forward with Nick, assuming that he would then be found not guilty by reason of insanity.
So during the term of the sentence, so let's say it's a 25 to life or 50 to life, Nick would be committed to a facility for a sentence of 50 years to life, with, again, the possibility of some point, being released if he is restored to sanity. And that's something that him and his lawyers would petition for.
Do you know if it's 25 to life and the judge, in a typical case, the judge could impose a sentence of 35 to life?
Absolutely.
But in this situation, would it simply be the statutory 25 to life that would carry over? Or could the judge in the first phase impose a more significant sentence than the statutory range? I mean, within the statutory range, but the minimum being higher.
The minimum could be higher depending on the degree and any enhancements.
Okay.
It's a pretty brutal, heinous murder. I can't imagine Nick Reiner getting anywhere near 15 years or the sentences running concurrently. I mean, this strikes me as...
I mean, I don't think I would feel safe with a Nick Reiner on the streets anywhere before 35 years from now at the bare minimum. So he's freaking 32, 35 years from now, he'd be 67. I don't know, 70, 75, maybe after that. But hey, if someone's still got the darkness in them, they can do some bad things regardless of how old they are. So, I mean, there's an argument he should just be locked up for life, period. I wouldn't necessarily argue that either.
Yeah.
Again, absent some serious evidence of mitigation, this strikes me as, a 50+ year type of case.
Yeah. So I've been following, Amber, have you been following what the questions that have come up in the chat? Because I've been listening. And so, okay, here's one. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay.
I do think there is security footage. We're talking about an 8-figure house in Brentwood, California. Actually, ironically, a few blocks from where OJ lived. So absolutely, this is LA. Everyone has security cameras. I think we will see that footage. And again, a lot of evidence in this case. Nick Reiner does not strike me as a Brian Koberger type, someone who's very careful in terms of leaving evidence at the scene. So I expect there to be a significant production to the defense of electronic evidence. Now, as far as character witnesses, excuse me, character witnesses can sometimes apply in self-defense cases. Again, I don't think self-defense is gonna apply here. Basically, the prosecution has to sort of open the door to that type of evidence. I don't think they would in this particular type of case. So I don't think we're going to see a character witness. It really only applies in a very small subset of self-defense cases, not in this case. I can be.
So L.A. obnoxious. This guy, L.A. obnoxious. That wasn't the vibe I got from him. What a troll comment.
Obnoxious. As far as the clips, it's really up to the judge to decide whether.
I don't think I don't think that person meant you. I think that person meant Nick.
Oh, Nick. Maybe we're both LA obnoxious. Look, I mean, a lot of people don't like people from LA, whether it's lawyers or defendants. And I think that is absolutely a consideration. And we talked about it. That sort of Nepo baby, rich, spoiled kid, drug user. I just think he's not going to come across as sympathetic.
It's like her chat's the same as my chat. Do you think this will go to trial? I don't think it will. I mean, like someone in the chat said before too, wealthy people have a way of getting off the hook somehow. And if you read Iceberg Slim's autobiography, he said the reason why Lady Justice has a blindfold on is because her eyeballs are made from dollar signs. Or she's got dollar signs in her eyeballs.
Especially when his father is such a sympathetic figure. He was involved in many charitable causes here locally in LA and really nationwide. So I think it's going to be very tough. Do I think the case will go to trial? I really do think it will. This is why a lot of murder cases go when there's no deal to be had, right? It's not like a Koberger case where you're going to plead guilty, you're going to take a life sentence, take the death penalty off the table. Here, District Attorney Nathan Hochman is going to ask for life. The defense isn't going to take life. So they're going to roll the dice. And let me tell you something about Hochman, the district attorney here. He's been DA for a little over a year, and his predecessor was voted out of office because a lot of people thought here locally that he was soft on crime. And there's the perception that crime has really run amok here.
So this woman's called Prof. Joe. That's her name. Prof. Joe. Prof. Joe Explains is the name of her channel.
In LA. So I can't imagine Hochman, the district attorney here, giving any type of discount or deal in one of the most heinous and gruesome murders in recent history. So because there's no deal to be made, I would be surprised if there's any type of plea. And when it comes to a plea, because it's a mandatory life case, it's not like the defense here can plead open, plead to the complaint, and ask the judge for less because the judge can't give any less than life.
Let's see.
Jurors in LA, they love celebrities. But here, the celebrity is Rob Reiner. Celebrity isn't Nick Reiner. So I think this is one of those cases where the celebrity factor helps the prosecution rather than the defense.
Do you agree with that? Do you think the celebrity factor helps the prosecution and not the defense? I don't think I agree with that. I think the money is on the defense's side here. Alan Jackson's the defense. So what do you think, though?
Oh, thanks, Nurse Kristen. Okay. I see. Well, here's another one because I see another one there. Go ahead.
So what was in Nick Reiner's system? So when he was arrested as part of his booking, they'll conduct a medical evaluation. And let's remember, Reiner missed his first court appearance because of a medical issue. It could have been psychiatric, could have been physical. Now, to do a blood draw or urine, generally you require a court order or a warrant. So I don't know if something like that was done when he was arrested.
And it was many hours after the killing anyway. So, you know, the extent to which you'd find the drug in the system, I guess it depends on the drug, but I think that would be another question they'd have.
Absolutely. If Nick were found not guilty by reason of insanity, he would absolutely receive his inheritance. So under California Slayer statute, the murder has to be done intentionally and feloniously. So if something was done unintentionally, then that would make him eligible for his inheritance.
And the jury won't know that either.
They won't. You know, California just hasn't had the death penalty in quite some time. It's no surprise here that it's a liberal state. And, you know, this is one of those, you know, public policy, political considerations, without getting in.
There's a moratorium on the death penalty in California. Why did they do it? Well, I think generally the liberal mindset is death penalty's not good. That's why they would do it. California, liberal state.
To the pros and cons of the death penalty. Just want folks to know that the practical reality is Nick Reiner is not going to be executed. We just don't have the death penalty here. And whether you agree with it or not, I think it's important because it does affect the negotiations and the calculus in this case. Because again, it's not in Idaho. It's not one of these states where, Utah, Tyler Robinson, right, in the Charlie Kirk case, he's facing the death penalty for that case. Luigi Mangione in New York, in the federal case, he's facing the death penalty, but not in New York State. So it does matter because it can dramatically change the course of the case. Because if you're handling a death penalty case as a criminal defense lawyer, your number one job and your only job is to keep your client alive.
It's an interesting public policy argument for having the death penalty, actually, to push fees and, and decrease the number of trials and not have a trial in which the likelihood of a different outcome is so low.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
So the question is, here in California, then the guilty plea followed by not guilty by insanity trial. So here, because it's bifurcated, you do have this guilt phase. And I mean, folks that aren't used to it probably think about a death penalty case, right? You have two phases. You have, the jury finds the defendant guilty or not guilty. Then you determine the appropriate sentence. In a death penalty case, the jurors are to weigh the aggravating and mitigating factors in that case. Well, here, once you decide the defendant's guilty, then the burden shifts to the defense, and they have to put on evidence of that mental disease or defect, the inability to know right from wrong, the monotony test that we talked about here in California. So
let me put it this way. I think in places like Louisiana, people have been given the death penalty for less, I would say. Depending on the state, you could see it's wild. I mean, because here's the other thing. People don't know this either, but if someone in law enforcement dies, like the chance that you get sentenced to the death penalty is exponentially higher. So any kind of federal worker or law enforcement officer, holy mackerel, and you're up the creek.
The reason I talk about the bifurcation is it's hard to do both because, again, you do lose credibility with the jurors if you really put on a strong affirmative defense and then you argue, hey, you didn't buy the self-defense or you didn't buy the manslaughter or the second-degree murder. Now we want you to find him legally insane. It's tough, and I think there's a very healthy skepticism of these types of cases, which is why I think it's challenging to present it both on the facts and the merits and how you handle that first part of the trial. It's going to be hard to find jurors in this because everyone knows about the Reiner case. I mean, I'm sitting here in my office in downtown about a little over a mile from the courthouse. So this is going to be one of those cases, Joe. It's going to be a complete zoo. I mean, everyone will have heard about this case. There's going to be lots more facts that come out in 2026.
Do you drive to work?
I do.
Do you have a parking space in the building?
I do.
That would be what I would worry about. I wouldn't be able to park for the whole time the trial is on.
Yeah, no, it's gonna be very, very busy here in downtown LA. So there's,
in case you're wondering, chat, he is not going to get the death penalty. I would be completely shocked if that was on the table, partially because of who he is, partially because of who his lawyer is, partially because it's California, partially because of what his father's belief about the death penalty was. All four of those, and you should say, oh, some of that shouldn't matter. It's like, well, it shouldn't, but it does. It does end up mattering.
No, at least in California, there's no guilty by reason of insanity. You're either guilty or not guilty. And then if you are found guilty, you can be not guilty by reason of insanity. There's no guilty by reason of insanity here. There's no diminished capacity, which means that you're guilty, but a lesser degree of guilt.
I don't know whether there are jurisdictions that still do it, but for a time, there were a few states that went to a guilty but insane.
Yes.
But I don't know because some of them have moved back from that and I haven't looked. But that would be, but not in California.
Not in California. I'm sure they're going to point the finger at the doctors and the meds. You know, the best defense is always a good offense, right? So you'll see, for instance, defense lawyers put law enforcement on trial. That's a pretty good tactic. If you can put the doctors on trial as well, instead of say some combination of drugs that caused him to do it, certainly a possibility. Again, challenging given that he does appear to be so lucid and coherent in the many interviews that he's done. Possible, but I think it's going to be very unlikely that.
Here's a possibility. Maybe Alan Jackson threw out this schizophrenia thing kind of as a balloon, like a weather balloon. Let's see how the public handles this. Let's see what they'll say. Let's see what the pushback is. So maybe he measured the pushback and he's like, now I'm seeing that's probably going to be a difficult thing to pull off the insanity on. Maybe I got to focus more on the medicine side of it. And maybe that will give me my best chance. But he's probably regrouping right now. He's probably regrouping, thinking, and then come trial, who might have a completely different case to lay forth. We don't know. But that wouldn't surprise me.
Defense will be successful.
Amber, that question came up already.
Oh, I think it's going to be live streamed on every channel, YouTube, Court TV, Law and Crime, local channels here. I mean, this is California. One of the great things about this state is we believe in fair and open trials. You don't get that in other parts of the country. That's why I love living here. This will absolutely be live streamed. I would be surprised if for some reason it were not.
Same jury going to hear assuming that they go with the insanity defense, same jury for both?
Yes, it would be the same jury that hears both parts of the case. So jail here in California is when you're sentenced to a term of 1 year or less. A state prison is more than a year. This would obviously be a state prison type case. And in jail, it doesn't matter whether it's jail or prison or state or federal, you can get drug and mental health treatment. There's different programs. For instance, Sean Diddy Combs is participating in one, likely the RDAP program. So there's different programs, and certainly someone like Nick Reiner, if he is in prison, would likely participate in those types of programs because, frankly, it seems like he needs it. The defense strategy in this case is really tough. I think the most conservative strategy would be to try to get that first-degree murder down to second-degree or murder too, as Professor Joe was saying. The more aggressive strategy would be to go for the home run, whether it's the insanity, whether it's self-defense, whether it's the involuntary intoxication. That gets your client a walk entirely. Obviously, I need to see more of the evidence, but for me, if the defense is able to get Nick Reiner the possibility of parole at some point in his life, given what we know now, I think that would be a win for the defense.
Any other questions? So here's a question for you. And I think I know it's difficult because we don't know what the evidence will be, but if you had to give a ballpark estimate now on what you know, how long do you think this trial will last?
I think the trial will last weeks, just in terms of jury selection. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of people that have preconceived views of this case. Jury selection tends to go longer here in California State Court. Judges do allow a lot of attorney voir dire. They don't allow it in the federal system or some other states, or to the extent that they do, it's much more limited. And, there's just a lot of evidence to go to in terms of the forensics, in terms of the science. Obviously, if you're talking about mental state, health, disease, or defect, this is the type of trial I would expect to last weeks. If I had to ballpark it, I'd probably say somewhere between 2 to 4 weeks, just my guess, given how these cases typically go. And look, I wish courts were efficient and this was the only matter on calendar, but sometimes they'll have to deal with matters outside the presence of the jurors and different law and motion issues. So, I would set aside potentially up to a month for a trial like this.
Okay. Any more questions? Because Nima has other commitments. He's a busy guy and a person that a lot of people want time from. Ending in a preposition. Sorry, I didn't in a preposition, bad English, but you get the sense.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Joe, for having me.
Well, thank you for coming. God, I'm sure the people in the chat were just thrilled at your expertise and your ability to communicate in ways that I think, people who are not law trained can follow. It was just great.
Well, I appreciate you. I'm your local guy here on the ground here in Los Angeles, so I'm sure we're going to be talking a lot more about this case as more and more evidence comes out.
Oh, I'm a New Yorker, Italian, so pushy is in my DNA. So I will definitely be back. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
So people watch Nancy Grace, and she does do some good debate/information gathering tactics where, like, if her guest says something, she makes sure she understands exactly where that came from. Oh, where'd you learn that from? Why do you know that? Why are you assuming this? What's your source? And she looks under every rock. Nothing's underturned. She leaves no stone unturned. That's the expression. But it's good because a lot of people, they believe too much what they hear. But she examines it and she cross-examines it, which is good. That is good for finding the truth.
Okay. And we'll stay on if there are any other questions or comments that any of you want to make, I'll stay on for a little. Yeah, he's really great. And he's a California lawyer. So, I mean, there are some lawyers who are really well-versed in the law and have a lot of trial experience and can communicate very well. But when you have all that and you have someone who's got boots on the ground in the sense that this is the place where he practices, it's a real home run because he doesn't have to guess what the law is or how the practice goes or how juries are likely to act because he's there doing it. So it really, it makes it gives a plus factor that's really, really terrific. And I'm really grateful that he was able to spend the time with us. What's funding the defense? Somebody's funding the defense. And the best guess we have is it's coming out of either an independent trust or the family.
I think it's the family because they said he's on retainer and the siblings are blaming doctors, not Nick. So that leads me to believe it's probably the siblings paying for it. That's not a guarantee. Hasn't been confirmed, but that's my thoughts.
Because the state isn't doing it. So it's got to come. And I don't know, Gossip, if you were there for Nima's. Thank you, My Father's Alibi. That's really kind of you. I don't know whether you were at the beginning when we talked about this, but you can't benefit from a crime. So if you murder somebody, you can't inherit. And I asked how that applies before there's been a conviction. And he said he thought that probate law in California would mean that they could stop the money being used to fund the defense. But the family members can pay for it. There may be an independent trust that the Reiner set up for Nick with a trustee who.
And the law, like I said before, is the Slayer statute that prevents people from benefiting from a death like that, if they might have been the one who did it.
Can then make decisions on his behalf. I think I heard, and I don't want to misquote Josh Ritter, but I think I heard him say that because he's also local to California, that he had heard that some lawyers were being approached about their willingness to take on a case like this. And he was guessing that maybe that's how Alan Jackson had his first contact with it. It doesn't answer how it's being paid. Nick doesn't have any money unless he's got an independent money coming from Carl Reiner to him. But that doesn't appear to be true because he was living in the guest house and the Reiners were giving him a monthly allowance. And I don't remember, it was a hefty amount of a monthly allowance. And I remember thinking, he's somebody who's prone to taking drugs. You're paying his living expenses. Why are you giving him extra money to do anything at all? But I guess I'm not as kind a parent. Okay. If I were defending a case, would I plead guilty and go for NGI? Yeah, you heard Nima say the same thing. Unless there's evidence we don't know about right now, unless they're going to be able to make some claim that some of the evidence they have was unconstitutionally seized, unless something like that is going on, what we see is there was one perpetrator and it was Nick. So he's not going to be able to say it could have been somebody else, anybody but me. That doesn't seem to be a defense that's out there. The next thing would be to give the defense would have to say he's got a reason that either minimizes his culpability or eliminates it. Now, self-defense
What does NGI stand for?
would eliminate it because you say, I only did it because I defend myself. That one seems to be impossible, given what we know of Rob Reiner and Michelle Reiner. And also, for me, the fact that they were killed with a knife. Because, as I said earlier, I cannot imagine that the Reiners kept a knife in their night table in their bedroom. And so, that being true, Nick had to enter with a knife. And it's pretty hard to make a self-defense claim when you affirmatively go into a room with a knife. Because at best, you're putting yourself in a position that you think might be dangerous. Otherwise, why are you carrying the knife? And you don't have to put yourself in that position. You're not entitled to claim self-defense after you stick yourself in the position and provoke.
Not guilty by reason of insanity. That's the first time I've ever heard that acronym used as that. People are obsessed with the acronyms. Everything's an acronym now.
It and then say, oh my God, then I had to do something. That defense is not available there. So, it looks like the insanity defense is the only thing he seems to have. And I don't know how arguing anything different at the guilt part of it would help. Does he still have Alan Jackson as an attorney? So far as I know, he's got Alan Jackson as an attorney. Yeah. Jackson doesn't look happy there either. Other questions? Yeah, I thought he was a great guest too.
Alan Jackson looked like he had some bitter beer face there. See that? This looks like a bitter beer face. Maybe a little constipation, maybe. You need some fiber.
An attorney. Yeah. Jackson doesn't look happy there either. Other questions? Yeah, I thought he was a great guest too. Very, very knowledgeable, very, very clear. And he knows California, which makes him just great. So I'll wait a second to see. Okay. So Animals Over Human predicts it won't go to trial and that the DA allows him to be declared insane. Well, we'll see. I
doubt it. I doubt it. He'll be able to get that.
Guess I would disagree, but we'll,
Why did it happen? I think Nick was a very bitter and resentful person, had some sort of character issue / maybe a personality disorder. And then there was a perfect storm of that resentment and envy and anger. And then, it could be a point where maybe he's just tired. He's also just tired and he says, you know what? Screw this. I'm going to go out with a bang. And sometimes there really is not much rationality behind it. Some people are like, well, what was he expecting to happen? There has to have been some logic behind it. Not really. It can just be like a thing they do. And they don't think much about the consequences. They just think, and he might have been thinking about it for a while. And he finally said, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to do it. And that's it. And that confuses some people and it really upsets some people. But there's a lot of stupid decisions that get made all the time. Same thing as someone that gets behind the wheel when they're blackout drunk. Looking out, like even the very person who does it, they couldn't tell you why they do it. It just seemed like a good idea at the time. And there's a lot of things that happen, a lot of crimes that happen. And that's as far as the thinking goes.
Time will tell. One of us will be right. Why did this happen? Crime and punishment? I mean, I don't know. Why does any crime happen? Why does evil happen? Why do parents kill their children? That I have no answer. Okay. Sanders 14, what are the chances that the defense will opt into speedy trial to keep a lid on evidence leaking? I assume the defense could do that, but if this is a complicated case, to get the expert witnesses to review the evidence, I cannot imagine that the defense would say we want to go quickly to stop it because the evidence we've seen already is pretty compelling. And it seems to me what they need is some time to see if they can counter some of it, not rush to get done. Okay. Jennifer and Tally says in Florida, there's a prison for those that are guilty and mentally ill. Is that true in other states? It might be. It's not certainly not true in all states.
Varies by state. Varies by state.
But it might be. Some prisons have sections of the prison for those who are mentally disturbed. It doesn't actually have to be somebody who's been convicted or not, or been acquitted by reason of insanity, but it can be.
And don't get it twisted. I absolutely think Nick knows what he did was wrong. I just don't think he cares. I don't think he cared. That's what I think.
People have severe mental disturbances and are dangerous because of it, and they may be segregated. So I didn't talk about, if there was time, I was going to talk to Nima a little about the jurisdiction issue. No, I take it back. I'm thinking of another case. Okay. Yashuda Devi, 2008. If I don't have that right, and I'm pretty sure I don't, give me an idea phonetically how to pronounce it. What if they claim that he was?
Oh, Yasho, you're in our chat too. Hello, look at you. You're a celebrity. And this isn't going to happen though. What if they claim he was locked up due to his weird behavior at the party? No. Got paranoid due to it, and no, I wouldn't think so.
Locked up due to his weird behavior at the party, got paranoid due to it, and attacked to break free. Well, we have no evidence. You can't just make claims. We have no evidence that occurred at all. I mean, if there's some evidence there that that's what happened, and then what? He broke free, grabbed a knife, and killed them. It's, you still have to get past what happened next. And paranoid, the insanity defense requires that you show that you did not know the nature and quality of your act. You didn't know what you were doing, in other words. You did not know it was wrong. And in California, you have to prove that. It's not up to the prosecutor to prove it. You've got to prove that it was more likely than not true, that you didn't know what you were doing, you didn't know it was wrong. And as Nima gave you some list of the things you have to get over, if you don't know it's wrong, then why are you cleaning up afterwards? If you don't know it's wrong, why do you run away? Why don't you just stay in the room or call?
And that's all the evidence he knew. He had that hotel room set up to go to. There's a lot of evidence saying he knows he was not in a state where he didn't know right from wrong. That's what it is required to get an insanity plea. I don't think he's going to be able to get it.
Call somebody because you don't know it's wrong. If you don't know it's wrong, why do you have a hotel room downtown? Why don't you just go back to the guest house? Those are the things you have to confront on the evidence if you're going to show that the defendant did not know it was wrong, which is why the defense is difficult in any case and seems to me to be extraordinarily difficult in this one. And you heard Nima, since the death penalty is not being, is really effectively not used in California, there's no plea that the state can give because it cannot take the death penalty off the table, since everybody knows the death penalty is not going to be imposed anyway. Even if it's imposed, there's a moratorium, it's not going to happen, then you just go to trial. So it's, it's a pretty expensive way. As a public policy question, it seems to me to be, tricky. It may be the best you can do if you're opposed to the death penalty, but it does have all these unexpected at the front end consequences to it, certainly in terms of cost to the people of the state. Because if the death penalty could be removed and he pled out to life without possibility of parole, you'd save a lot of time, effort, resources. You'd also save, the impact on the family and all of that. Okay. Bobby Jean 8858 says these last two cases Alan Jackson has taken on seem like tough to prove innocence. You heard him when somebody in.
And Alan Jackson might be doing this for notoriety too. It's kind of like a business or an investment in his career. Not that he even needed it, but at this point, what excites Alan Jackson? Probably high profile cases. And there's definitely money in high profile cases too.
In the chat asked about innocent by reason of insanity, and he said not guilty by reason of insanity, and there was a reason for that. Criminal trials do not, the question in a criminal trial is never is a defendant innocent. The question in a criminal trial is, has the state proved its case to the burden that it has, which in the criminal case is beyond a reasonable doubt? That's why in the OJ case, he could be acquitted in the criminal trial. And then when the family
and correct. And that's what people don't think about when it comes to defense. All they have to do is prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the prosecution isn't completely right. And there's many ways of doing it. They can be a mistrial. Oh, you collected evidence the wrong way, or they try to find whatever kind of loopholes they can. So it doesn't seem fair to a lot of people, but it absolutely happens. And what's that woman that just came out on TikTok? What the hell is her name? The one who people think did her daughter in. What was her name? She got off on one of those.
One of the victims sues him civilly. He can be found civilly responsible for the killing. Different burden. So innocent is never anything that happens in a criminal trial. What happens in a criminal trial is the defendant not guilty? And that means, did the state prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt? You can say, I'm pretty sure it happened. If you're pretty sure it happened, then you're not saying the defendant is innocent. You say, I'm pretty sure it happened, but I didn't get to proof beyond a reasonable doubt. You're saying not guilty because the state didn't meet its burden. I hope I made that clear. Okay. Leisharp. Did he not waive his right to a speedy trial at the first arraignment? I don't know that he did. I think they postponed the preliminary hearing. I think that's all that occurred. And you don't irrevocably waive. You can decide at a different point to say.
Casey Anthony is who I'm thinking of. She actually had the nerve to make some tickety talk videos too.
Now I'm going to, now I say I want this trial to go and assert the right. It's not, I don't think anywhere it's in, it's a one time and then you're done. Okay. Other questions?
All right.
You want me in that? Well, it's after January 6th. If somebody reminds me to.
Okay. That's enough of this. We'll go to the next one.
Full in-depth breakdown of the backstory.
This is a devastating tragedy that has befallen the Reiner family. We all recognize that. Our hearts go out to the entire Reiner family. There are very, very complex and serious issues that are associated with this case.
And it was that statement from Nick Reiner's attorney, Alan Jackson, that could be a preview of potentially several different kinds of legal defenses that could be mounted in this case of the man accused of brutally murdering his parents, Rob and Michelle. From mental health to the sufficiency of the evidence to mitigation to potentially self-defense, we want to examine what theoretical defenses could come into play as we explore this rapidly developing story. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Now, here's the truth. I don't know if we'd be able to put these episodes together if it wasn't for the incredible support that we get from our sponsors, and that includes Morgan & Morgan. This is America's largest personal injury law firm. This is a firm with over 1,000 attorneys who have recovered $25 billion for more than 500,000 clients. Think about that.
Ugh.
Rob Reiner and photographer and producer Michelle Singer Reiner, who were found dead in their Los Angeles home back on December 14th. What we haven't discussed yet are the potential defenses to be on the lookout here. Because as we go through this evidence, you do have to wonder, is this a slam dunk case for the prosecution or not? That is what we want to go through. And to understand potential defenses, we have to go through what we know right.
So here's what I think. This is the prosecution's case to lose. Now, how could they lose it? If it's somehow found that they made like an illegal arrest or evidence was collected illegally, those would be the blunders that could help the prosecution. And there's a chance that Alan Jackson thinks to himself, maybe that's my best chance here to try to find a way to get to a mistrial. Very possible.
Now, like, for example, it has been reported that the death certificates for this couple indicate that they died just within minutes of sustaining, quote, multiple sharp force injuries inflicted with a knife by another. That Rob was apparently found at 3:45 p.m., Michelle about a minute later. By the way, it was reported that the couple's daughter, Romy, was the one who found her father dead after the couple weren't responding to a scheduled massage therapist appointment. Now, Nick was arrested hours later in the Exposition Park area near USC, the Santa Monica hotel room where Nick apparently checked into at around 4 a.m. Sunday the 14th, apparently using his own credit card, which is, by the way, potentially quite incriminating because he reportedly had been living.
Now, this is a picture I haven't seen. So this is Nick here, balding a little bit, receding hairline, frowned, doesn't look too happy. Looks like a different version of him than we saw in those interviews with his dad about the movie being Charlie. I don't know what happened between then and this picture, but whatever it is, doesn't look too good.
In the back house of the Reiner's property. So why check into this place at all times? Well, it's been reported there was blood in the shower and the mattress of that room. He's currently being held at the Twin Towers Correctional Facility. And this comes as there is footage that has surfaced that's been released of apparently Nick allegedly walking alone at a gas station close to the Reiner family home a little after midnight on that Sunday. There's also apparently footage of him allegedly in a convenience store right before his arrest as well. By the way, I will tell you, I think his apparent demeanor in that footage, assuming it's him, could be critical in a potential defense, which I'll talk about more in a minute. And this all comes as it was also reported Nick had attended a party at Conan O'Brien's house the night before the killings, in which he allegedly went around asking strange questions to guests, got into this apparent weird interaction with actor Bill Hader, then had some sort of loud argument, potentially with his father at the party. His parents left shortly after. A source told People, quote, Nick was freaking everyone out, acting crazy, kept asking people if they were famous. I will say family friends have reportedly said the fight was overblown. But we also know, and we did a previous episode of Sidebar, a full in-depth breakdown of the backstory of Nick Reiner, that this is a man with a serious history of substance abuse issues, that he's been open about that, talked about his struggles since he was 15 with heroin, that he was homeless, that he was in and out of rehab, that he and his father collaborated on a film known as Being Charlie, which was released in 2016, that's about a young man addicted to drugs and his difficult, combative relationship with his former actor father, who's cold and distant as he tries to recover. Rob, by the way, directed the film. So with all of that in mind, as Nick Reiner faces these murder charges with special circumstances, namely multiple murders, there's also a special allegation that he personally used a dangerous...
Now compare and contrast this picture with the one we were talking about. This looks like a much different version of Nick, even a healthier version, I must say.
And deadly weapon, a knife. We're talking now the death penalty on the table if convicted.
Versus this picture, much different, night and day.
Or at least life in prison without parole. Death penalty questionable, by the way, because there's been a moratorium on executions, but serious consequences nonetheless.
And again, my skill set is I can read faces. I read faces more than I look into body language a lot of times because I don't think your face can't lie. People can fake body language, I think. And that's why I want to see the body language experts take a look at the people in movies and the actors. Take a look at a good actor, Daniel Day-Lewis, or fill in the blank anyone. Can you detect it? Can you detect if they're faking?
And he's already made his first court appearance and currently hasn't entered a plea. His arraignment is set for January 7th. The question again is, what could be his potential defenses here? Because it seems like alternative suspects may be tricky, still in the early stages, but what may theoretically, what may possibly be something that Alan Jackson explores here? That's what I want to talk about. Okay, so let me bring on former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani to talk more about this. Nima, thank you so much for taking the time. All right, I got to start with the big one here.
This is the same guy that was just on Prof. Joe.
A lot of people have been talking about this. Insanity. Now, I mean, one of the prime reasons that I think this is coming up, in my opinion, is because of what Nick Reiner's defense attorney, Alan Jackson, told to reporters after a court hearing. Take a listen.
There are very, very complex and serious issues that are associated with this case. Those need to be thoroughly, but very carefully dealt with and examined and looked at and analyzed.
So to me, making a statement like that, right, complex, serious issues, before a defense attorney has the opportunity to see all the evidence or know if there was like a constitutional rights violation, it seems to me he's talking about mental illness, mental health. Could be wrong. Nima, before we get into the specifics of how insanity and how mental health could play specifically into this case, just to put that to the side, just so everybody knows, procedurally, how does an insanity defense work out in LA?
Jesse, thanks for having me. And Alan Jackson, of course, is one of the best, not just in the courtroom, but outside the courtroom. So there's certainly a PR battle being waged here. But here in California, when you're talking about legal insanity, the trials are bifurcated. So first, there's a guilt phase that we typically see. Did the defendant do it or not? Is he guilty or not guilty? If the defendant is guilty, then we move to a second phase where the burden shifts to the defense, and it's based on a preponderance of the evidence. And here in California, we follow the Manhattan test, which says that because of a mental disease or defect, the defendant didn't understand the nature and consequences of his actions. Basically, he didn't know right from wrong. But the reason procedurally the bifurcation is important is it's very difficult for defendants and defense attorneys to really pivot.
This is Jake here. Romy. Romy is an attractive girl.
Sometimes you'll see them try to argue self-defense or it wasn't me. And then when the jurors return a guilty verdict, they say, no, it was me, but the defendant was legally insane. Yeah. So it's hard.
Can I ask you about that? Yes. I mean, typically, how does it work? Do they go and say, hey, listen, he wasn't the one who did this? Or do they question the state's evidence, right? They question whether or not the state has proved beyond a reasonable doubt all the elements and then say, okay, we respect your decision. But after all that, I know we were casting doubt on him doing this. We're really going the insanity route. Or do they just say, hey, listen, we're not going to fight. We're not going to fight the trial phase. Do they plead? They can't just plead guilty and then go into the insanity defense. Am I wrong? I mean, I don't know how it works.
They can. And I think the better practice is to accept responsibility and move straight to the insanity defense. We've seen this sometimes with defendants who are facing the death penalty. Nicholas Cruz, for instance, right? We covered it here on Law and Crime, worst school shooting in American history. He pleaded guilty.
And that's a horrible sketch of him there. Different hair. He looks like a sad fellow. Sorry looking fellow here.
17 counts of murder and 17 counts of attempted murder. They went straight to the death penalty phase, and they were able to maintain some credibility, and they ended up saving his life. But when you defend it on both grounds, it ends up being tougher. I do think you lose credibility with the jury. Right. Now, there are some other ways that mental health may come into this. I can't see Alan Jackson walk.
Looks like a completely different person. Look at that. Completely different person. Could you imagine showing this version of Nick Reiner, him in that Suey smock 15, 20 years later? And like, this is going to be you in 15 years. Can you believe it? Huh.
Walking into court and pleading Nick Reiner guilty and moving straight to insanity, because insanity, again, is very tough. It only works really a very small percentage of the time, at least here in California.
Let's talk about that. So you're right. If you look at the law, it says because of that mental disease or defect, this person was incapable of knowing or understanding the nature and quality of their actions, or was incapable of knowing or understanding that act was morally or legally wrong. Now, again, before we get into the specifics of Nick Reiner, generally...
And to note, as I've mentioned before, some symptoms of antipsychotic medication is absolutely weight gain. I'd been on Zyprexa many years ago, and it would force me to eat like 20 pounds of food before bed. And if I didn't do that, I would wake up in the middle of the night eating my pillow. And so that was a part of the weight gain. Zyprexa and Seroquel, you'll gain weight on those two things. And that very well could have been what happened to Nick.
Speaking, how does a defense prove that? I mean, who do they call? How do they prove it? At the time, these killings happen, right? How do you prove it at that time? And what evidence is introduced? And what does the prosecution do to rebut it?
So obviously you rely on mental health experts. It seems like Nick Reiner was under the care of a psychiatrist. He's obviously been in and out of rehab, at least what's been reported. From the prosecution's perspective, obviously they call their own witnesses, but you just look at the facts of the case. Jesse, if you're capable enough to have an argument with your parents and even know it's your parents, like Conan O'Brien's Christmas party the night before, and you're capable enough to go to a hotel in Santa Monica and wash off all the blood and close the curtains and go to a gas station and get a drink, that doesn't strike me as legal insanity. It's really a high burden. We talk about this person's crazy or insane. We throw that out a lot, but to really not know the nature and really consequences of your actions, not knowing right from wrong, you really have to think like you're killing a demon or an alien or God or the dog is telling you to do something, but you don't really know that's wrong. It's very difficult to prove.
It's very difficult to prove, but let's apply it to this case. So there are reports from outlets like the Los Angeles Times and KNBC that Nick Reiner was receiving medical treatment for schizophrenia at the time of the deaths of his parents. Okay. First of all, if that's introduced, is schizophrenia the type of mental disease or defect that could be necessary for insanity? Let's start there.
It could be. It's certainly one of the ones that is most commonly argued in these types of cases. So
here's the other question. So outside of schizophrenia, what else would be grounds for reason of insanity? What other conditions? What would they even be? I don't know. What outside of schizophrenia? And then a drug-induced psychosis, that doesn't count. So what else are we looking at here? Like a severe bipolar, maybe? Severe autism or a developmentally disabled? I don't know. What do you think, chat?
So that's certainly, I'd say, a first good step for Nick Reiner, but it's not enough. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. Going back to the old LSAT days. So just being schizophrenic does not make you legally insane if you know right from wrong.
But here's the thing, Nima. Okay, if you look at that footage, right, the demeanor of him, or allegedly him, in that footage, walking by the gas station, in the convenience store, to me, it's eerily calm. If this is, we don't know the exact time of death, but if this is somebody who just massacred their parents, you want to talk about a fact pattern. Isn't a fact pattern somebody commits a brutal murder and then just sits there and waits and acts like nothing's happening? Now, I don't know what he was thinking at that point. It's hard to just judge from the footage. But when I looked at that, I said that could be something that Alan Jackson may be working with if you're talking about an insanity defense. Am I totally wrong here?
No, you will try to use it, but being a stone cold killer doesn't make you legally insane. We have seen these types of murderers with that type of affect. Brian Koberger, right? I mean, he's shown little to no emotion at any time during the many years that he's been in court, and now he's going to serve the rest of his life in Idaho State Prison. So it does fit the profile of the killer. Again, if you know what you're doing, again, you're able to walk to a gas station, you're able to pay for a drink. That is not someone who's legally insane, in my opinion.
What about getting a hotel room? I think that you're probably right. That
and I agree with the lawyer here. That's not insane.
I mean, he was apparently living with the parents, so getting a hotel room out of all times. What do you think?
Yeah, getting a hotel room at 4 a.m. in Santa Monica where you wash off the blood in the bathroom and it gets all over the sheets you clean up. Again, someone who's legally insane isn't capable and coherent enough to clean the blood off them. I get it. You know, there has to be some sort of defense, and I know Jackson will come up with something, but the actions before and after, to me, are not consistent with someone who's legally insane.
There are two parts to this as well. So I'm going to get to the other idea, how mental health may downgrade the charge, in a second. We'll get to that. Just focusing on insanity, though, the reports of how he was acting at that party, Conan O'Brien's party, the night before, and nothing's been officially confirmed by law enforcement. But if he gets into an argument, is asking weird questions of guests, is that help the insanity defense or not? You seem to suggest if he's capable of getting into a coherent argument, that would suggest he's not insane, right?
I would, because look, you're asking someone what their first name is, what their last name is. Are you famous, right? You argue with your parents. You have to leave. And again, we're going to have a lot of famous celebrities here in LA.
It always reminds me of the old, what's your name? Who's your daddy? Is he rich like me?
Who are going to testify at this trial. I do believe it's going to go to trial, whether it's Bill Hader, whether it's Conan O'Brien, other folks. They're going to say, listen, here's someone who's acting erratically, but someone who, again, if you know it's your parents, and you know that this is a famous person, that just doesn't strike me as someone insane. Maybe this is a former prosecutor in me, and I'm being skeptical. And I just know how rarely this works I don't think it will. Now, maybe they go in a very different direction and they don't argue insanity and they say that he was drugged. You have an involuntary intoxication defense. I think that's something that is more likely to work than legal insanity, in my opinion.
Just to be clear, any kind of insanity defense or a mental health defense would be negated if he was voluntarily on drugs. So whatever effect the drugs had on him, he couldn't then argue he was acting insane, right? It doesn't work.
Of course. Yeah, we know voluntary intoxication is not a legal defense. Involuntary, maybe. And again, we know based on Karen.
That would be interesting how many involuntary cases out there where someone was maybe drugged and then did a crime. I wonder if they're out there. And the YouTube sleuths out there want to find a case like that?
Read that the defense may present a very different alternate theory of the case. And one of them may be, listen, here's someone who's been sober for a while, right? Reportedly has been off drugs since September. He goes to a party, someone spikes his drink, and there you go. Things spiral. Now that would be creative, but it would actually be a legal defense.
And just to be clear, before we move on to more mental health ideas, if he took something and the effects of it were completely different than what was anticipated, if there was laced with something, because I've seen cases like this before. Somebody might smoke marijuana, it's laced with something, it has an effect they weren't anticipating, and they commit a crime. Can that downgrade a charge? And we'll get into that a little bit more, but can it?
No, generally speaking, if you voluntarily take drugs, you're responsible. So if it's laced with like...
Woo, that's gotta suck too. Imagine you take something and it's spliced with frickin' acid. That's what Charles Manson would do to people. Actually, he would tell his people they gave this one person 8 hits of acid in a hamburger and their goal was to drive them insane, and I think it worked. But they did that. They did do that.
PCP, for instance, that'd probably be the most likely psychedelic that could cause someone to do something like this. You're responsible, but if you're taking a legal drink, an alcoholic drink, and something like that were to happen, then you would have a defense.
Got it. Okay. Before we go through past insanity, I just have to ask you this.
And that's the thing. How do you prove you were taking it involuntarily? If you have a drink at a bar, for example, and your drink gets drugged at a bar, well, how do you prove it? How do you prove you didn't just pop it in the bathroom or something? I don't know.
Reason this is a defense that people are talking about.
And I guess one way to prove it would be if there's cameras. There's cameras in that establishment, they could see someone putting something in there.
Just because if someone is declared insane, right, not guilty by reason of insanity, what happens to them? They go to a psychiatric facility, not prison, and for how long?
They're committed for the term of the sentence until a determination is made that they are now returned to sanity, in which case they can be released to the general population.
Okay, so this is why it's a big deal. Now, putting insanity away, I think there is a second related defense that's come up. That if you talk about mental illness, that he won't be found not guilty of first-degree murder due to insanity, but he could be found not guilty of first-degree murder, but rather a lesser charge because of his state of mind, because of his mental health. Can you explain that?
Yes. So first-degree murder, of course, requires premeditation, the intent to kill. Now, voluntary drug use and mental health can negate the specific intent for a crime. So it can reduce first-degree murder, the premeditation, down to second degree. Why is that a big deal? Now, District Attorney Nathan Hochman has talked about the death penalty. That's not realistic. We haven't had an execution here in almost 20 years. But first-degree murder with special circumstances does carry a mandatory life without the possibility of parole sentence. Second-degree murder without special circumstances would potentially be as low as 15 to life on each.
So first degree, life, no parole. But if it's second degree, 15 to 20 with maybe a chance. That's a big difference.
Count, which would give him a chance of parole at some point in his career. Now, some more conservative attorneys may go that approach and say, listen, he did it, but talk about the drug use, talk about the mental health. He lacked the specific intent for premeditation, right? He just walked into the bedroom
something happened, right?
So can you explain that? So put aside any kind of drug use for a second, because we don't know 100% if he was on any substances at the time. If he was, just for argument's sake, if he was schizophrenic and he was having an episode, so it doesn't mean that he's insane at the time. What's the argument? What's the fact pattern laid out by defense that would say he's not guilty? He didn't have the intent to kill, but yet killed his parents and was schizophrenic. Like, how would that, again, explain that to us a little bit?
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously the prosecution is going to argue this was premeditated. This was all related to that argument at Conan O'Brien's house, right? They're there, they fight, they come back to the home. Reiner comes back with a weapon, goes into the master bedroom and kills his mom and dad, right? The defense will say, no, that episode passed. You know, he went into the bedroom. It was a different, unrelated argument. It was not premeditated. He did not come with a knife. The problem is when you get in an argument and you come back with a weapon under California law, that's first-degree murder. That's premeditation. That's what happened in the Nipsey Hussle case, right, where they argued manslaughter in second degree. But you come back with a weapon after any period of time, that is enough for premeditation.
That's a very important point. So you could say he was in an argument at Conan's house because that's what people reported. So he leaves, gets the knife, does that in the house, first degree.
So the defense will try to separate that argument, separate that episode from the night before and say, hey, something else happened. It was really spur of the moment, not enough for manslaughter, but certainly enough for second degree murder.
Right.
That will give the defense and the defendant, Nick Reiner, a chance of parole at some point in his life.
Okay, so this now goes into another defense that I'm curious will be explored. And I don't know if there is anything to substantiate this in any way. I haven't seen anything that would. I'm talking self-defense. Now, I would imagine a self-defense argument would be a complete not guilty or maybe a conviction for manslaughter, right? You know, heat of passion. Is there an argument that he was defending himself from an imminent threat from his parents, acted in the heat of passion in the moment? You know, there was, for voluntary manslaughter, there was terror, there was anger. I'm assuming after this reported, let's say, altercation at the party, if that's true, anything there?
It's going to be tough. You know, you got Rob Reiner, who's 78, right? Michelle Reiner, 70. You know, you got Nick, who I believe was 32 at the time. That's a big age difference, right? For you to credibly argue self-defense. Now, when it comes to self-defense, there's two types here in California. There's perfect self-defense. If you reasonably believe you're at imminent risk of death or serious bodily injury, you can use deadly force, similar to the rule in many states. We also have imperfect self-defense, which says that if you genuinely but unreasonably believe you're at imminent risk of death or serious bodily injury and you use deadly force, that reduces murder to manslaughter.
I don't think there's any way he's going to get either one of these self-defenses. I just don't see it. Not a chance.
Obviously a big deal if they are able to prove that. So that's one of those ways that maybe the mental health can come in. It's going to be tough, though, to argue self-defense against your parents, especially if they don't have any type of weapon.
And I would also imagine what would complicate that argument is they were apparently found in their bedroom late at night, multiple wounds, a knife. Those are all complicating factors for the defense, right?
Oh, no question. You know, and there's different reports. We know that at least from medical reports, we have multiple stab wounds. There were some reports unconfirmed that their throats were slashed. Obviously, that would be bad for self-defense if that were true. Being in a master bedroom, again, makes it less likely that you're going to be defending yourself against someone in their master bedroom. It does seem to be at least circumstantial evidence of premeditation that you went in to attack them.
And he would have to testify about that, Nick Reiner, I'd imagine.
Usually, yeah, Jesse, the conventional wisdom is in a self-defense case, the defendant has to take the stand. So obviously that would subject him to a grueling and rigorous cross-examination.
I want to backtrack on one thing before I go to another defense. This is also sort of a defense. Could a history of mental disease or a history of addiction, can that be used as mitigation for sentencing to lessen the sentence in some way?
It absolutely can. You know, the issue is obviously if you get hit with that first degree special circumstances, the judge has no discretion to go anything less than life without the possibility of parole. But absolutely, all that evidence can come in to sentencing if there's an indeterminate sentence and a judge can sentence within a range. That comes in all the time in any type of criminal case.
And of course, maybe a way to get the death penalty off the table, maybe even in front of a jury if they hear that. And this is another defense that I wanted to get into, where the defense legitimately attacks the aspects of the prosecution's evidence. We're seeing this in the Mangione case, where I think the evidence is, quite strong that he committed the crime, but can they get evidence thrown out on the basis of a tainted investigation, that a defendant's rights were violated in some way? One of the key ways defense attorneys can dismantle a prosecution's case is to get the evidence tossed out. And when thinking about the evidence, before we go into it, I just want to go back to what Los Angeles District Attorney Nathan Hochman said at an earlier presser.
At the appropriate time, the actual evidence involved in this case will be presented in a court of law. So I ask for your patience until that is done. But again, please do not rely on rank speculation, rumor, or hearsay to believe that you understand anything about what went on in this case.
So Nima, again, they haven't revealed what the evidence is, the forensic.
And again, that's a fair thing to consider and to keep in mind. That make sure you're hearing things from the horse's mouth, what's true and what's not true, what's speculation, what's trying to divert your attention. And this is true of anything, by the way, whether it's politics, current events, whatever it is. It's good to be a little bit questioning.
The digital evidence, we get samplings of it, but talk to me about the ways that Alan Jackson and Nick Reiner's defense team, what they could do here. And again, it's difficult because authorities haven't revealed a lot of the evidence yet, but what are ways they could get evidence tossed out or question the evidence?
So we've seen in Mangione in many cases where the defense will file suppression motions, say that evidence was unlawfully seized, often in violation of the Fourth and Fifth Amendments of the Constitution, really to go on the offense. Now, we saw in, again, the Karen Reed case where they really put Massachusetts law enforcement on trial. They really destroyed the lead detective, Michael Proctor, in that case. So good defense lawyers, what they do is they point to sloppy investigation, rush to judgment. These are themes in many defense cases. They try to get evidence suppressed. They'll say that evidence was planted. Again, I don't know how careful Nick Reiner was. I imagine that a house in Brentwood has surveillance video, and he didn't seem to be particularly careful in terms of his cell phone and where he went after the murder. But it's certainly possible that they can get some evidence tossed and suppressed and put LAPD on trial. They certainly don't.
I would not be surprised if Alan Jackson tries to play that angle at all. It's like I said before, shooting for a mistrial, illegal evidence gathering, planting evidence, any of that to make the conclusion in doubt. Beyond a reasonable doubt, as they say.
The best track record, and I say it respectfully as someone who lives and works in Los Angeles, they have botched some big cases. So given Alan Jackson's sort of track record of going after law enforcement and LAPDs, it's possible, but again, I think it's very unlikely. This strikes me as a very strong case and one that's going to be difficult for Jackson and the defense.
Because they seem very confident that he did this for whatever reason. I don't know if it was the hotel room that was allegedly stained with blood, the surveillance footage. They haven't indicated, at least as far as I know, where the murder weapon is or the circumstances of that. But you would say that they feel fairly confident in the evidence they have against them at this point and the sufficiency of the evidence and the way it was collected.
I do. In these murder cases, you typically see three defenses, right? It wasn't me. I mean, it seems like the evidence is going to be strong. Again, usually in a multiple murder stabs crime scene, there's going to be a lot of blood and other DNA evidence. I expect to see that in this case. The other is self-defense. We talked about it. The third is, I didn't mean to do it, right? It was an accident. It was manslaughter. It was something less. So I think they're probably going to have to go in that third direction and try to attack the intent somehow. Say it wasn't him and it was someone else that did this, I think there's going to be a tough legal and factual hill to climb. But we'll see. Maybe they'll pull a rabbit out of their hat.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything indicating alternative suspects, but we're still early in this case. And if that should develop, maybe we'll do another sidebar on that one as well. Nima, thank you so much for taking the time and breaking it down with us. Really, really appreciate it. And healthy, happy new year if I don't see you beforehand.
Thanks, Jesse. Happy new year to you too. I'm sure we're going to be talking about this one for quite some time.
All right.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much.
So do you want to watch a Pop Psych or a Moon video? The Moon's interesting. You got the old British accent, makes him sound smarter.
intervened and discouraged calling 911. On December 13th, 2025, Conan was hosting a Christmas party, which, to quote Hollywood Reporter, was chanced to, quote, shake off the bad mojo of 2025 and look forward toward a happier and more hopeful new year. Rob Reiner is there with his wife Michelle and their 32-year-old son Nick, not because they wanted to, but because they were allegedly too afraid to leave him alone. And for those who don't know who Rob is, he was one of Hollywood's most successful directors, directing The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, This Is Spinal Tap, A Few Good Men, and he was one of the industry's most influential voices. And they were in Los Angeles, a city of separate worlds that rarely touch but have a lot more in common than everyone thinks. Down at street level, you've got the sprawl, the traffic, the density, people living paycheck to paycheck in apartments they can barely afford. Drive west and up into the hills, and that's where the party was hosted. Here you'll enter a different world behind the gates, where all the celebrities live and socialize. We're talking Bel Air, Brentwood, and the Pacific Palisades, where you find houses behind gates on clean streets.
Interesting. I've never seen this map before. Very interesting.
Sealed away inside of their own bubble. This is where Hollywood really lives. It's not just an industry, but a completely separate reality with its own rules, its own currency, its own definition of what makes something matter. Up here, problems don't look like problems at first. They look like something money and management can handle, until they can't, and something finally breaks through and gets treated as a shocking rupture rather than the endpoint of a long visible process. Nick is at that party with his parents and their friends, wandering through and asking people the same question over and over, always curious about who these people are and whether they're famous or not. Some are used to it, some think he's drunk, others wonder if he's on something, but almost everyone was uncomfortable. A few even assumed that he may have wandered in from one of the other worlds outside of the hills. When a few guests suggested calling for help, Conan intervened and discouraged calling 911, saying it was his house and he didn't want to escalate the situation or make this public. Eventually, Rob and Nick apparently got into a very loud argument that others overheard, prompting the family to embarrassingly leave the party early. These are household names in fame and show business, but they're dealing with a very real human crisis. Nick was clearly extremely unwell, and when you scroll through some of the videos surfacing now, you can see his behavior has been concerning for a very long time. Allegedly, he was furious at Bill Hader when Hader responded that he was in the middle of a private conversation. But you still don't think...
And allegedly, if he was furious at Bill Hader in that spot, why was that? Because especially if he's narcissistic, and they're hypersensitive to criticism and perceived criticism, Bill tells them this is a private conversation. Oh, and he won't like that one bit. He's not getting his way. He's not in control. And he might have went into some sort of silent rage at the time.
That someone is genuinely capable of doing something as monstrous as this. Sometime in the early morning hours of December 14th, Rob and Michelle Reiner were killed in their Brentwood home by what police called multiple sharp force injuries. Around 12:15 a.m., Nick was then seen near a gas station close to the family home. By 4 a.m., he checked into the Pierside Hotel in Santa Monica, where hotel staff later found the shower and mattress covered in blood. Tragically, it was Rob and Michelle's daughter that discovered...
Shower and mattress covered in blood. How does that happen, though? If the murders were not done at that place, how does that happen? I'm still a little unclear on that.
The bodies, and Nick was arrested at 9:15 p.m. near the University of Southern California. Trump then dumped that wild post on Truth Social, which was just kind of insane, and it speaks to how desensitized everyone is to violence now. It's just the same as when all the memification of Charlie Kirk's murder took over everyone's timeline. Quote, a very sad thing happened last night in Hollywood. Rob Reiner, a tortured and struggling but once very talented movie director and comedy star, has passed away together with his wife, reportedly due to the anger he caused others through his massive, unyielding, and incurable affliction with a mind-crippling disease known as the Trump derangement syndrome. Here's something important to understand about Rob himself. Regardless of his political views, he didn't grow up in this broken system. He was from just a different generation entirely, growing up on the East Coast in the Bronx. Billy Crystal, who worked with him on When Harry Met Sally, said Rob was, quote, one of the most decent human beings I've ever known. When he transitioned to directing in the 80s, he didn't just hire the most expensive team and chase spectacle. Spinal Tap was a low-budget movie consisting of almost only improvised dialogue, giving viewers the impression they were watching a real heavy metal band. And it's why it was hugely successful, because it was authentic. It was almost the opposite of all modern movies today. And it was in the 2000s and 2010s, as Hollywood transformed into something more algorithmic and hollow, that Rob just seemed to get uncomfortable. He made fewer films and focused more on political advocacy. Friends said he was just frustrated with what the industry had become, with the endless franchises, the risk aversion, and focus on opening weekends over lasting impact. And then there was Nick. To try to understand what happened, the first thing everyone did was look at his life. For starters, he'd been homeless in Maine, New Jersey, and Texas. He'd also been diagnosed with schizophrenia in addition to suffering from drug addiction, and did have a history of violent outbursts.
And that's only from TMZ and their undisclosed source. Remember that.
Even apparently having shocking childhood tantrums, though clearly nothing as horrific as this. Reports are now saying that the Reiner family definitely knew his behavior had become more erratic in the lead up to this night.
For the past couple of weeks, both Michelle and Rob have had concerns about Nick's behavior. He'd become a bit more erratic. It seems in the past couple of weeks, he became more erratic. His behavior became unpredictable. Even at the party, I believe one of the guests has now come out and said that they overheard Nick arguing, and even Rob was expressing concerns with his own safety when it comes to Nick.
Back in 2015, Rob had directed a film called Being Charlie, co-written by Nick and a friend he met in rehab. The movie follows an 18-year-old drug addict whose father, a former actor running for governor, struggles with his son's addiction. The film revealed that Rob and Michelle had sent Nick to 18 facilities, sometimes against his own will. The first time, he was just 14 years old.
Many kids go to rehab against their will. I went against my will. I just didn't fight it when I was, 18 or 19? So technically I could have, but I just kind of went along with it.
Admitted he overreacted by sending him to a treatment center when he caught him using drugs. And Rob admitted that when Nick would tell us it wasn't working for him, we wouldn't listen. He said we were desperate, and because the people had diplomas on their wall, we listened to them when we should have been listening to our own son.
You know, the parent is, your main job is to keep your child safe. So I would do anything. I felt at a loss. So I would do anything that, as we say in the film, anybody with a desk and a diploma, I would listen to them. And the whole idea of tough love and you have to be a certain way. And it's not my nature. It's not the way I am built, but I went and did that. And I think that, at the end of the day, I know my child better than an expert does. And I probably should have trusted my own instinct.
That was a fatal flaw for him to say that. You can only say that if you truly understand mental health and addiction, and you truly have a connection with your son. I think the entire time the connection he had with Nick was fake. Rob might have thought it was genuine, but I don't think Nick ever thought it was. That's just the impression that I get. And you can say other issues got in the way of the connection, but ultimately, I just don't think Nick liked him. I don't think he liked him. He was envious of him, resentful of him, and so they never connected. And in this case, Rob should have listened to the licensed professionals because I think they were right. Nick was lying and manipulating and deceiving in order to use more.
The big question here is why this can happen. Why does first-class treatment in every sense possible fail so badly? How many failings are there along the way to something like this happening? Rehab is a staple of the Hollywood lifestyle, but the majority relapse within the first year. Higher if you're going back to the exact same environment that broke you, which is exactly what happened to Nick and loads of celebrity children before him. The age divide has a lot to do with it. Nick was born into a totally different celebrity dynamic entirely. 2000s Hollywood, where identity is performance, community is transactional, and mental illness gets commodified into content. Rob was trying to apply old school values, genuine engagement, painful honesty, working through trauma as art, to a system that had become fundamentally incompatible with those values. A $50,000 a month facility has quarterly earnings targets. The therapist billing $500 an hour has a schedule to maintain. Nobody's incentive is to sit with you forever until you get better. It does work for some people, but it's really a paid substitute for real care. And this is Los Angeles all over. It's full of fake approximations of the real thing. You'll walk around Hollywood and realize the city doesn't have a cathedral, but it does have Scientology's Celebrity Center International in the center of Hollywood, with 39 hotel rooms and celebrities like Tom Cruise and John Travolta giving sermons that the rest of us probably wouldn't connect with. As you walk around, you'll find an Erewhon, the upscale organic grocery chain where Hailey Bieber's $22 strawberry glazed skin smoothie sells 40,000 units monthly, and you can get a nice little jar of Manuka honey
I didn't know that. 40,000 units monthly of a $20 smoothie. Wonder how much she makes from that.
With it for $78. It's the temple in LA where the religion practices the cult of wellness. Wellness in this world is something that money can buy, but Nick and other tragic Hollywood Nepo baby stories prove it can't. Look at what's happening right now with Ariana Grande and the Wicked movie. The way the whole thing just feels completely detached from reality. The baby voices, the faux sincerity, the theater kid effect taken to an almost cultish level. People outside the bubble can tell something's off immediately. Ariana Grande and Cynthia look like they're actually starving. Inside it though, this all gets treated as authentic and meaningful, so it just goes unchallenged. Challenging all this strange performative behavior is offensive and doesn't square with the Hollywood value.
Now what they say is Ariana and the other woman, they think they have eating disorders, and people with eating disorders can be very competitive with one another, and they kind of have this bond over that plus what they do. But it's a very unhealthy dynamic.
Values where eccentricism and disordered behavior blurs into one thing. But if Ariana Grande was your kid, you'd probably be worried looking at these photos. Same with Jaden Smith and his castle head, and his out-of-touch social media posts. With a freaky father like Will Smith who's just completely losing his mind performing to fake AI crowds, and doing everything possible to get attention, there's just no normal reference points for someone like him.
Will Smith is performing to fake AI crowds? That's the first I heard of that.
Especially with his mum and dad's fame and very public relationship problems. Living up in one of these gated hills in Los Angeles, you're just so out of touch you almost don't know what real reality ever is. Normal people get to find out who they are and others are through trial and error. Celebrity kids, or those celebrity adjacent like Nick, never get that. They grew up in this hall of mirrors where every reflection is distorted by fame and status, and every small choice is magnified by the press, which all falls into this concept called ontological insecurity, basically a pervasive uncertainty about whether you even exist as a real person. For most of us, that's like a 3 a.m. existential crisis we once had in university, or it might just happen after severe stress or bereavement. But for kids immersed in this world of fame in Los Angeles, that's just your baseline reality. When there's always a camera around, when your parents' careers depend partly on maintaining a certain image, when every interaction is about what you can get from other people and their status, when the main thing you care about is your follower count.
How creepy is that now, seeing Justin Bieber with Diddy there? I was watching a special about Macaulay Culkin the other day too, and it's true. It's a whole different world for those children celebrities, and look at the ones that were at Nickelodeon. A couple of them are not doing well now, so it does a number on them. But I also think with AI and social media coming up, there is this sense of depersonalization out there where people are just disconnected from one another. The only way they connect is online. And sure, I mean, that's where I am here, so I get it. I totally get it, but it kind of feels surreal. But what do you think?
Where every birthday party might end up in TMZ. It begs the question, where's the line between the real you and the performance? I mean, you see this just endlessly all the time. The Rock, Will Smith, James Corden, Justin Bieber, even Diddy. We've spoken about this so many times on the channel. Child stars get pushed into adult spaces surrounded by power, money, and secrecy. Years later, addiction, eating disorders, and abuse. The public eventually forgets who these people are. I mean, just think of Britney when she went from being the biggest celebrity ever to a Hollywood footnote. And so the way that Nick describes his relationship in that interview really revealed a whole lot about what it means to grow up in this weird dynamic.
I think the bonding came not from the story itself, but from the fact that we were working on a movie together, and I could see him in his, I would think, in the form that he could express himself the best, which is making movies, because he has so much experience. And so seeing that sort of turned me around to be like, okay, I should probably shut up and listen to him because he knows a lot more about this.
I just think that's such a fascinating thing to say, that like your father, who you would always want to be at his best as your father, may be a type of person who's at his best when he's making movies.
And so when you listen to what Nick just said here, but then you remember what he said on the Dopey podcast, that he was kind of just faking it here and going along to get along, and he still wanted to use right after this, kind of puts a different light on what he's saying right here, doesn't it?
And that makes him more understandable or relatable as a father to you, which is so fascinating to me.
Yeah, that it really clicked for me because we didn't bond a lot as a kid. Like, he really liked baseball, I like basketball, and he could watch that with my brother, but baseball. But I just, when I saw him do that, and it was something that I'm interested in, I was like, wow, like he really knows a lot. And like, it made me feel closer to him.
So he only felt close to his father when watching him work, when Rob was being Rob Reiner, the director, not Rob Reiner, the dad. But the real truth is, stories like this are just a microcosm of something going on all over Los Angeles. For years, its grinding systems turned personal crisis into a logistical problem, something to be handled through access, money, and management. That's how people can deteriorate in plain view without ever becoming anyone else's responsibility. Problems don't belong to the group, they belong to the individual. If you are rich, you can just pay $100,000 a month for rehab or send someone to a new therapist with a different degree from a different Ivy League university. LA still gets away with the solution as it's been running the most successful marketing campaign in human history for about a century. Hollywood exported this image of sunshine, palm trees, beaches, beautiful people living their best lives. The place where you reinvent yourself and anything.
I've been there to that pier.
Becomes possible. Just look at La La Land as the perfect case study, a movie that won 6 Oscars and got nominated for 14. And it's basically a love letter to Los Angeles that romanticized struggling artists chasing their dreams in the city. Millions of people move to the city because they believe these kinds of stories. But the dream is unfortunately just a dream for 99.99% of people today. As LA is a modern city right now in 2025, it's just completely broken. It's an endless suburban sprawl, with no third spaces, individualistic, living in isolated boxes, with the streets lined with homeless, desperate people. Things like public transportation are filthy, unsafe, and not even working properly. The city spends billions and it just seemingly evaporates. Instead, you have to usually spend 2 hours a day minimum sitting in traffic, sealed in your...
So when I went to LA and Malibu, the sense I got from the place is it's a very shallow place. A lot of shallow, very image-oriented, people seeking money, power, status. And I just got this fake energy from a lot of them. Not everyone, but a lot of them. There's just something just kind of superficial about the whole place. I didn't like it. It's fine to visit, but to me, it's not a place I'd want to stay.
Metal box, while the built environment around you is literally falling apart. Away from the hills and the beach, there are whole neighborhoods without proper roads or sidewalks. Endless homeless encampments full of fentanyl addicts with rotting limbs unable to access life-saving healthcare. Or even when they can, they just choose not to. All of this accumulates to the fact that if you live up in the hills away from all of this stuff, you just become immune to it. You become numb to human emotion, which is crazy when you realize LA's GDP is over $1 trillion, which is higher than Switzerland or even the Netherlands. And yet this is just a fact of life. If you're one of these people, you will just drive past it every day. It's just there, part of the landscape, and after a while, you just stop seeing it. The city teaches you how to not see things, and if you want community, you have to pay for it. That's why underneath all the Erewhon smoothies, group meditation sessions, sound baths, vitamin drips, is one of the loneliest cities in the world. So guess what happens when people become persistently isolated and anxious? Well, they often develop mental illnesses or turn to substances to cope. So you take...
And that's one way. That's one way it can happen, but it's not the only way it can happen.
Someone, especially a vulnerable kid like Nick Reiner with psychiatric risk factors, drop them into an environment where substances are everywhere and private doctors will prescribe whatever keeps you functional, surrounded by people who are just trying to get something from you because of your dad's fame, can just lead to absolute psychoticness. And no amount of rehab is going to fix that when the environment never changes. If it's just normal to take Adderall to focus, Xanax to calm down.
And they had said previously that Nick was on Adderall as a kid because they thought he had ADHD. I can't say that does good for the developing brain. Now, some people will say, oh, but it's good. It's good if you have ADHD. I don't know about that, especially as a kid.
Ambient to sleep, and coke and alcohol on weekends to feel something again. There's now an entire ecosystem of sober living influencers in the hills, people documenting their recovery journey for content, monetizing their trauma, building personal brands around sobriety. Mental health has become an aesthetic too. Therapy speak dominates conversations, everyone's setting boundaries and doing the work and healing their inner child. But a lot of this is just performative. You're not processing trauma, you're just posting about processing trauma, which leads to a strange parallel here to Rob Reiner's most famous film. This is Spinal Tap is fundamentally about people who've lost perspective, a rock band so deep inside their own world that they can't see how absurd it's become. Everyone thinks they're being sincere when they're not. Like when you turn the amplifier up to 11 thinking that one extra number is going to make everything better. Rob understood what happens when you lack self-awareness perfectly when he was making the movie.
And that's a good word for it too. Insincere. That's the vibe I got from LA. Insincere. That's the perfect word for it.
You can do everything you're supposed to do and still fail because you're operating in a framework that doesn't work. In the film's case, that's the rock industry. In LA, it's real life. A city full of people just following broken systems, trying their best within structures that ensure failure, eventually rupturing incidences that appear random but are really the endpoint of that much larger, more visible process that becomes invisible the closer you are to it.
Fraud is everywhere in the United States.
Intervened and discouraged calling 911.
Last video.
It's not a consequence of schizophrenia. It's not a consequence of drug use. It's not a consequence of homelessness. It's the whole picture together. And I want to sort of walk you through how a psychologist might look at a situation like this. A week and a half ago or so, I hear that Rob and Michelle Reiner are stabbed to death, and their son, Nick Reiner, who's 32 years old, has been charged with the murders. And I hear that and I immediately think, I think that we all hear that and we immediately want some kind of explanation for how something so horrific could happen. And
this guy reminds me of what, Jason Statham? Is that his name? The guy from The Transporter?
I mean, shortly thereafter, it came out that people thought he had schizophrenia. And I was immediately disappointed. I feel like schizophrenia gets such a bad name, or I should say it this way. 1% of the population approximately is diagnosed with schizophrenia. The people that are diagnosed with schizophrenia are not violent people. It's exceptionally rare for someone with schizophrenia to become violent. In fact, the data is overwhelming that if you were schizophrenic, you're much more likely to be perpetrated on by other people. So when this comes out, I was thinking it's just a ploy on Nick Reiner's part to avoid culpability.
So this is the Dr. Drew thing, right? And this is like my thing too. Like I'm not ruling it out completely, schizophrenia, but it's just not what I thought. Most schizophrenic people are not violent, just like most autistic people are not violent. Remember that. Now, meth users, though, that's a different story.
Going to plead insanity. That's the angle. And then I watched the interview that Nick and Rob Reiner did when they were promoting their film, Being Charlie. And it changed my perspective. Look, I can't diagnose from afar, but you can look at that interaction. You can look at Nick's performance in the interview. And I'm not surprised that that diagnosis has been made. Now, again, there's no official diagnosis that's been given that I am aware of, but TMZ, People Magazine have reported that he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. So let's just operate under the assumption that those sources are accurate. My goal with this video is to explain how something like this happens. It's not a consequence of schizophrenia. It's not a consequence of drug use. It's not a consequence of homelessness. I think it's the whole picture together. And I want to sort of walk you through how a psychologist might look at a situation like this. So let's start with schizophrenia.
So I'll walk you through how a wizard would see a situation like this. How does the shepherd of black sheep see this situation? I would say you would first need to get off the drugs first. But if you don't do that, that says something in and of itself. And yeah, you might be self-medicating a mental illness for sure. But ultimately, there's separate parts. I get the feeling he was undiagnosed on the spectrum. But then also, he had those character issues. He had the character issues, behavioral issues. And that's why he was prescribed ADHD as a kid. And he was entitled, spoiled, a rat, envious, resentful, bitter, impaired empathy, grandiosity that wanted to come out. All of those combined. And then you angle that like Sauron's eye on Rob and Michelle Reiner. And then poof, you get some bad actions. Now, the addiction, if there is still active addiction going on, it just makes everything worse. Right? But you need to unravel these things to get better. What I would say to them is you need someone to be clean first. so you can really figure out what's going on. Get them clean. A lot of people's mental health symptoms can improve once they get clean. And maybe they don't need meds from there. Maybe they do. But if they don't, after say 6 months to a year, all right, well, we got to figure out what's going on here. Maybe they need a mood stabilizer. Maybe they need an antipsychotic. But whatever it is, you figure it out. But when you're clean, you can truly see what's going on underneath. If you're not clean, everything becomes more of a struggle. And that's why it was such a bad thing when he basically tells on himself about the reservations that he had. And then Rob says, well, I don't want to listen to the licensed professionals. I'm going to listen to my son. Bad choice.
The symptoms of schizophrenia really fall into 3 global buckets. In the first bucket, you have what we describe as positive symptoms. These are not positive like they're good. They're positive like they are added to your sensory experience. So you can have hallucinations where you are seeing things, or you are hearing things, or sometimes you are smelling things that are an addition to how you might normally interact with the world. You can also have delusions. These are additions to how you perceive things. You can have delusions about how people are interacting or what's happening in the world, despite clear evidence to the contrary. There's also the positive symptoms of scattered speech or disorganized thinking. When you're talking to someone, they're jumping from topic to topic, and there's no real connection between those 2 discussion points. Then there's negative symptoms. These are things that are taken away from your experience. So this is like you're losing energy, or you lose motivation, you lose drive and focus. Everything gets pulled down. Your affect is blunted. Your speech gets reduced. It's difficult to connect to people. You become socially withdrawn and less able to experience pleasure. These negative symptoms are less dramatic, so we don't talk about them as much, but they are, in the experience of people with schizophrenia, oftentimes the most debilitating. And the last bucket is what I would just describe as cognitive symptoms, right? There's an impairment in problem solving, an impairment in focus and attention. Working memory goes down. People struggle to really understand what's happening in the environment around them. And I'll add to that, what can make schizophrenia especially difficult to treat is that patients oftentimes have anosognosia. This is where people don't recognize the significance of their mental illness. So think about someone who has
And who was talking about this that we went over before? Who was it? Not Brian Etten, but there was another person we went over whose name I forget, went over this. I don't think it was Dr. Grande either, but it was another psychologist. Let me know if you remember, chat, because you remember it was probably around a week ago now, but he mentioned this term.
Had a stroke, who has Alzheimer's. Sometimes they don't clock the fact that they're not processing the world the way that they should. So if you're schizophrenic, you're seeing things that aren't there. You have no positive emotions. You can't express yourself or connect to people. Your thinking is disorganized, and you don't know that it's a consequence of schizophrenia. So when someone says, we would like to medicate you, or we would like to treat you, you don't say, yes, give me the support. You say, I don't need it. Something's just wrong with the world. It makes it very difficult to support those patients. So when I hear about, or when we all hear about schizophrenia, the emotion we should have is not disgust or judgment, right? The emotion should be compassion, empathy, sadness. It's a horrific mental illness when it's not treated appropriately. So let's talk about the big issue here, which is violence. As I said in the beginning of this video, it's very rare for people that are schizophrenic to perpetrate against other people, much more common for them to be perpetrated against themselves. Schizophrenics make up about 1% of the population. The last numbers I saw was that they account for about 5% of the violent crimes. That difference, the 1% to 5%, nearly goes away when you account for drug use. So because people with schizophrenia are in such incredible distress, it's common for them to self-medicate. So we don't know exactly which drugs Nick Reiner was using, but there's a clear history of him being in and out of rehabs throughout his adolescence. What I've read was he didn't graduate from.
So here it is. Took me a while. Andrew van der Vaart, MD, PhD. We went over this term that he used previously in that video.
High school, I think he got a GED, and then his adolescent years were very, very difficult. I've read different reports, 15 or 17 different rehabs that he's attended. So if I was conceptualizing Nick, it would be easy to think, okay, we know that the end diagnosis apparently was or is schizophrenia. Schizophrenia typically shows up late adolescence, early 20s, a little bit later for women. You probably had someone who in their adolescence during those difficult years was having some prodromal symptoms, some early symptoms of schizophrenia, right? Like the chaotic thinking or the inability to focus, maybe less comfort with people, less ability to experience positive emotions, less energy, those kinds of things that would have distanced himself from others, that would have felt uncomfortable for him. So if you look at the timeline throughout Nick's adolescence, he may have been self-medicating and then ending up in rehab facilities and pushed there by his parents. And that was a very negative experience. I think it's important to note that Nick may have connected being put into rehab with his parents' decision-making. And again, if his thinking is delusional, we don't know.
So I could tell you from my perspective, being undiagnosed on the spectrum, having lots of anxiety, when drugs were the only thing that I was living for, and when I say the only thing, I truly mean the only thing. It was the only time I felt any kind of relief, comfortable in my own skin, etc. And as long as that was the case, I didn't even want to stop. I didn't want to stop. And partially it was because my baseline level of consciousness, my baseline mental health was so bad that I wanted to escape it by any means possible, because I didn't realize I was undiagnosed on the spectrum. I didn't realize I also probably had CPTSD from being bullied, etc. So I didn't know that. But what happened to me was in my early 20s, I got tired of negative consequences. I was crashing cars, and I stopped doing really bad stuff only because they put me on Suboxone and antipsychotic, Zyprexa. But I'm lucky I did not crash my car and kill myself or someone else doing that, because I was sleeping like 16 hours a day. It's a miracle I survived that. But it did get me through the day-to-day where I was able to not need to jump out of my skin. But then finally the consequences caught up to me, and then I truly did get clean. I got clean off of everything, and I started going to 12-step programs. And I did that for several years. But then I realized my anxiety was still there. And I was like super sensitive, my bipolar. I thought I was bipolar. And I was going through these manias, mild manias, severe depressions. And I was like, what the hell is wrong with me? And then that's when I started taking supplements. And then finally, in my early 30s, I realized, oh, that's probably what it was, undiagnosed on the spectrum. I thought it was borderline for a while because it seemed like it added up. And then people were saying, well, if you're undiagnosed autistic, you could turn into a borderline. And I thought that for a second too, but I was like, nah, probably more just undiagnosed autism plus CPTSD. But what got me through it was the spirituality part of the program. Like that helped me through to the next phase until I realized what was going on. And it took a while. It takes a long time, and no one can give you that willingness. And there's so many things that had to fall in place for me. And there was a lot of luck involved too. It takes a while when you have multiple issues, neurodevelopmental, mental health, addiction. It's hard. It's hard. But the program, the 12-step program, it helped the character part. It helped accountability, honesty, humility, self-awareness. That stuff was key, absolutely crucial and key, and gave me a community as well.
What kind of connection he was making there. But, and I'm making some assumptions here, it's possible that this explains Nick's homelessness throughout his adolescence. I think he potentially chose to live on the streets and not go to treatment facilities than to live in his parents' house. The larger context here is you have a child that grows up in a very affluent and successful household, right? Nick's grandfather was successful, his father was successful, and Nick is struggling to keep it together. Now, in 2016, we got more insight into the relationship between Rob and Nick Reiner. Nick co-wrote a film called Being Charlie. Rob produced that film, and in 2016, they were promoting it, and they held a public interview, which has gone viral. And I will, if people are interested, I will do a moment-by-moment reaction to that interview. But what I will tell you is It was a very uncomfortable interview. First, you can easily see the negative symptoms of schizophrenia in that interview, right? Nick does not seem connected to what's happening. He doesn't show much emotion. He doesn't show affection for his father. He doesn't show.
I don't think schizophrenia is the only thing that explains that, though. It's a possible explanation, but I also think it's explained by undiagnosed autism, too. It could be explained by that as well. It could be explained by just simple awkwardness of being on stage and not being comfortable in your own skin. It can be explained a little bit by not really having a connection to your father and being envious of him. It can be explained a little bit by the vulnerable narcissism. There's so many things that can explain it.
Happiness. He just seems very sort of out of touch and disconnected and scattered in his thinking.
You had a personal connection to her right away?
No.
Just felt like you knew her.
Felt like I knew her from some land.
Yeah.
No.
And this came on set for the majority of the shooting?
I was on set with him. Yeah.
No, sorry, go ahead.
I have no idea what I was going to say. Well, I try to be funny whenever I can, but I don't really know. I don't know what that meant.
And you see his father trying to loop Nick in constantly and struggling to do so. Very often, Nick said, I have no idea what the question that was just asked or what are you getting at? He had the working memory was clearly limited.
That's something that you could answer. I mean,
what was the question? Sorry.
He wanted to know if...
What I thought was even more interesting was the way that Rob described his own parenting of Nick throughout Nick's childhood. He explained that by making the film, he learned that he had made a mistake of listening to the mental health professionals and not his own son about what Nick needed in the way of parental support. And I have a very strong reaction to that because I think it's a huge mistake. I don't want to blame Rob Reiner, but I think it's a common mistake that parents make. You love your children so much and you want things to be right and you want them to love you back. And here you have Rob trying to connect with his son that has the negative symptoms of schizophrenia. I imagine feeling frustrated by that and Rob's like wanting to show, son, I love you and I believe in you and you're right. And
you know what you have to do with that? This is what I would suggest someone does. If you're a parent and maybe your kid is someone like the way I used to be. And what it would be like for me is if you're trying to connect with me and I'm not feeling it, I want nothing to do with that. So what you don't do is charge, smother. Don't do that because that would just piss me off. I mean, that can still piss me off to this day, by the way. So it would be more like, let the person come to you. Give them some space, especially if they're undiagnosed on the spectrum or there's a schizophrenia issue. Give them the space and let them come to you. Don't keep on like smothering them and bombarding them and demanding to connect. That's not the prerequisite for a good connection. The prerequisite is people sharing a space and being there on their own terms. And some parents would say, oh, I shouldn't have to do all that. It's my child. I should be able to do what I want. It's like, not really. Everyone's different. Everyone's going to be a little bit different. Everyone's going to relate to and connect to different things. And you have to figure out which way it is with each one of your kids. And it might be different with each one of your kids. But that's what I would say as someone who is in that spot.
He sort of made this decision to give all the power over to Nick Reiner. But because people with schizophrenia oftentimes struggle with anosognosia, they don't have good insight into what they need for treatment. To ask Nick, who has disordered thinking and is abusing drugs, to manage his own health care is a bad choice. And I think a lot of times parents make that error. It would have been much healthier for Rob to continue to push his son into treatment and support. Without question, the mental health professionals who are objective in their evaluation of Nick would have a better path forward than Rob would.
It forced me to have to see more clearly and understand more deeply what Nick had gone through. I felt at a loss, so I would do anything that, as we say in the film, anybody with a desk and a diploma, I would listen to them and the whole idea of tough love. And
yeah, this is the thing where I keep on saying Rob should have listened to the licensed professionals in this way. But that being said, Even the licensed professionals wouldn't be able to help Nick if Nick didn't want to help himself. And that's the thing about addiction and character issues, or maybe even narcissism. If they don't want to change, there's nothing you can do. There's nothing anybody can do. All you can do is give them consequences. You can't make them willing. You can't make them get honest with themselves. You can't make them put in the footwork. And you can't give them resilience. So when you can't do those things, what's left? Just consequences. That's it. So he should have listened to the licensed professionals. But even so, if Nick didn't want to change, the licensed professionals weren't going to get him to change. Now, the only exception to this would be if they give him some kind of medicine that makes his day-to-day consciousness acceptable so that he doesn't want to run away to drugs. If you can do that, okay. But there's no guarantee that can happen. There's no guarantee that will happen.
You have to be a certain way, and it's not my nature.
So if I step back and look at all of this, we have the schizophrenia, you have the drug use, you have the familial pressure, you have the risk of homelessness, treatment facilities, all of this kind of stuff. If you ask me to guess, well, how does something like this happen? Here's what I would say. First of all, people that are schizophrenic are not violent. But when they are violent, it is more likely that they hurt people that they are close to, like their family. Now, part of this is just proximity. But another piece of it is it's very easy for the family members to be people that are influencing the life of the schizophrenic person. And because they have this anosognosia, sometimes they struggle to understand why their family is putting them into positions that they don't want to be in. Now, we've all heard about this big fight between Nick and Rob Reiner at Conan O'Brien's party the night of the murders. And I don't know what happened or what was said during that discussion. But it's very possible that Nick could have been acting in some way that led Rob to set some kind of boundary for Nick. Maybe it was take your medication. Maybe it was going to treatment. I don't know what it was. But I would imagine that because of this anosognosia, Nick may not have clocked that he was experiencing some negative or positive symptom, that he was experiencing psychosis. And so instead of seeing Rob's restriction as a form of support, he could have viewed it as a boundary violation, punishment, control, manipulation.
And I don't really agree with this assessment because it's assuming the schizophrenia diagnosis. I think the character issues, undiagnosed autism, and perhaps vulnerable narcissism, they explain it better than this. This seems to be a little bit more of a complicated explanation, which I don't know. What do you think, chap?
Something egregious. And again, because of the disordered thinking, that could have led to incredible levels of agitation, panic, anxiety, stress, right? All of those things, which then lead to more and stronger delusions and hallucinations. And my guess would be, if I were to conceptualize this, that something like that triggered Nick and moved him to a place where he was totally out of touch with reality. And that's why he lashed out at his father and mother. Again, I am making big guesses here. My goal with this video is to help you understand schizophrenia, help you understand the situation around Nick, but also to help people separate schizophrenia versus the abhorrent behavior that Nick displayed. Those are two very separate things, and only in exceptionally rare circumstances is there the overlap between violence and schizophrenia.
Right. Thank you very much for this. To Thrive sounds like he's describing misperception / perspective. Yeah, I mean, he's coming at it from the angle of, okay, he has schizophrenia. This is what could be going on because he has schizophrenia. You made it. You made it. Better late than never, To Thrive. That's what they say. So I don't know. I'm not ruling out schizophrenia completely. I just think other things can explain it just as easily, like I had been saying. And sometimes, again, and you can't give people the willingness to change. If someone doesn't want to change, there's not much you can do. If someone wants to continue using, not much you can do. You can enforce consequences, and then that's pretty much it. And that's where Dr. Drew is correct, I think, too. He was saying consequences like a minimum security jail or something, just losing his freedom for a little bit. That might help someone like Nick. It might have helped. Might have been better than, definitely would have been better than what happened. Now, there's a possibility he gets worse in jail. That's a possibility for anyone. But maybe he doesn't like losing his freedom. He loses all of his privileges, and he's like, screw this. I don't want to have that happen again. And maybe he turns his life around. But one thing's for sure, what they did do didn't work. And what someone doesn't do, if what they do doesn't work, you got to try something different. So for Nick, they needed something different. And they didn't get it. They didn't do it. Nancy Grace, is you in your? Nancy Grace. Nancy Grace. I'd get along with maybe some Nancy Grace. I love healthy relationships and all these crazy conflicts, for sure. For sure. He decided to fuck it, wanted to check out. He felt thrown away unseen by the time he was 14. I don't know. I don't know what it is. Thank you very much for this, D Fox. I appreciate that. I'm glad you found me too. You are the best. Let me know any other kinds of cases or topics you would like to see me go over. I'd be happy to oblige you on that. Let's see. Great live, great company, great conversation, great host. Thanks, Adam Levine. Back in the day when I used to be a taxi driver, everyone used to really think I was Adam Levine because I think I used to look more like him than I do now. And people would like literally think, oh my God, are you him? I was like, nope, I'm not him. But people would think they were. And so they'd call me Adam Levine. Yeah, welcome D Fox to the chat. She seems like or she or he. It's always hard to know with some of these names. But good flock of black sheep. Talks about it. But the thing is, just because Nick talks about something doesn't mean he's telling the truth. That's always something you have to wonder. You have to wonder which part's true, which part's not true. It's hard to say. Hard to say. So tomorrow, tell me, chat, I can go over U.S. attacking Venezuela. That got me in trouble, though, on Facebook. People can't handle it. People can't handle... And I didn't even make an opinion about it. I just said that the Trump administration was saying the same things about Venezuela that the Bush administration said about Iraq. And that got me in all sorts of trouble. You just can't talk about anything. I lost a friend, actually, from it. Someone I've interviewed on the channel here. She got so mad, and she was telling me what I should and shouldn't do. She's like, you should stick to this because you have no idea what you're talking about. Stick to narcissism, and you should delete this post. And I said to them, don't tell me what to do. And she said, oh, don't worry. You'll never hear from me again. Unfriended me. And I was like, wow. But it gave me the idea for the best narcissist repellent video that I'll be uploading tomorrow. And that's the thing about these situations. You learn. You learn when you put it through the lens of what can I learn? What's the opportunity? You'll often get some good ideas. And for me, they're like, oh, you can make a video about this. That's the opportunity. Reverse. But I'm like, I don't know. I just don't have those parts in me that get so mad about those little things. Like I can listen to anyone's opinions and I just don't like lose it instantly. But some people just lose it. It's not me. But like I said, though, it was close. It was by the fraction that we didn't go over that tonight. Because when I looked at the total on the poll that I did, the Nick Reiner thing was winning. But the last time I looked, U.S. versus Venezuela won. Oops. But we'll see. We'll see how that goes. It's good. When you have self-acceptance, you can be okay with rejection. That's for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think they are. There's some drugs coming from Venezuela, but I don't really think that's the real reason why they're doing it. I think most of it comes, like the fentanyl comes from China and friends. People should. It's good to be, the more acceptance that we have, the more self-acceptance we have, the more comfortable we are in our own skin, the better we'll go. Drug prices going up, that's not what we need. We need to negotiate some drug prices. How about that? I'd like to hear more on Venezuela. I don't understand the war. So right now we took out Maduro. We arrested him. We arrested Maduro and his wife, and we brought them to New York City. And they're going to do a trial. I don't know what the trial, they called him like a narco-terrorist or something. But the problem is the government is still in power. Like the rest of his government's still there. So it's like, okay, well, how are you going to make sure they leave? You're going to hold an election and then try to get that woman who was going to win the Nobel Peace Prize. You're going to make sure her government gets in there. I don't know. I don't know how they're going to enforce it. So we'll have to see. Because on one hand, the people of Venezuela, they're happy that America did this because they were oppressed and they were in a terrible situation. So that's true. But on the other hand, I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know how we're going to do it. Absolutely oil's involved, Dan, for sure. Absolutely. But so what do we do now? I don't know. I couldn't tell you. Time will tell, you know? Time will tell. China is sneaky and we better pay attention or they will be the leader. They're angling. China plays the long game. They're patient. And they're doing well. I mean, look at the rules they have for TikTok there versus what we have here. They don't have half-naked girls on their TikTok there. They have like educational TikTok. We have brain rot TikTok. They have educational TikTok. But there's also an AI arms race too. So we'll see what happens with that. Every country is racing to do these things with AI. And they don't want to lose the battle. Thanks for staying up late with us, Kat. Where Kat is right now, is it 7 a.m. where you are? Or 6 a.m.? Holy mackerel. Yes, it does. Why are we involved in the war? I will find out tomorrow. Well, the official reason is that they're narco-terrorists. Fentanyl is a weapon of mass destruction. Their leader was an existential threat to America. And what's the other reason? We want to free the Venezuelan people from their dictator. And he's sending drugs over and committing crimes against us. That's the official reason. The unofficial reason is, well, there's lithium and oil there. And the guy we took over is anti-Israel. He was speaking out against what happened in Gaza. And the people who are going to be put in place, or so we hope, I think, or so America hopes, I should say, pro-Israel. So there's many layers. And again, if you're interested, we'll learn about it tomorrow. Break it down. We'll break down all the sides. Sweet dreams there, Kat. Yeah, meanwhile, they're destroying the water supplies of rural America for AI data. Yeah, this is true. This is very true. Crazy Days and Nights reported that Nick Reiner participated in the 764 cult. What is that? I don't know what that is. There's stuff to learn. Like I said, we'll go over it all. I'm going to try to find sources from all sides. But honestly, though, I couldn't find any sources today that were pro the war. All the Republicans that might have been pro it didn't make a video. And I was like, what the hell is going on here? I only saw Democrat videos or people like Jimmy Dore. Jimmy Dore made a video. Economy is in bed with China and Russia oligarchs and $70 billion invested there. Yes. Well, that's the other side of it, right? They'll say, well, Venezuela is a puppet of China, is what they'll say, right? But we'll see. We have to unravel it all. We have to tear it all apart. And we'll get to the truth. That's the goal here, to get to the truth. You have a good night, YouTube. And yeah, I guess that's about it, because I have no more videos to go over. And we'll have to see. We'll have to see what happens tomorrow. But thanks for joining me in the chat, everybody. Good to see you here, Charlie. What is 764? Is that like a Scientology thing? Or is that something else? You got it, Heather. Thanks for participating and being here and sharing your insights. I appreciate it. You have some good insights to share. You got it, the finisher. Tonight's show, we'll see you. We'll see you all. We'll see all the fellow black sheep tomorrow. And with that, Song Bits, thank you for modding. Always Sunny, I think he bailed out earlier tonight, but thanks Jimmy for his previous modding. And it's been a good chat. People don't mess with the chat here too. Not too many trolls, which is good. Definitely do to thrive. Definitely do. 10 o'clock usually. 9:30, 10. But usually 10. All right, all. Over and out.